globally responsible business? That's the main question. That's the main focus of our work. Here with us together in the next 2 days, building on a common world ethos, how do we advance globally responsible business? So it's both about reflection and about action. And we're building, of course, on the work of Hans Küng here with the project Weltethos. I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and I also expect Professor Leisinger to make references. He will be our first keynote speakers, and he's one of the main authors and initiators of the Global Economic Ethic Manifesto, which you see there as a foundational document for our institute as well. I'll be talking about it a little bit in my own presentation. And it also spans what we've done here in the past 5 years together with the Humanistic Management folks who've published here books such as From Capitalistic to Humanistic Business, an effort to put into practice ideas that we have at the Global Ethic Institute. As always, we're trying to fulfill our agenda in 2 steps, which is we'll have an input through keynote and panels. And then we will reflect throughout workshops. So after every input session, either a keynote or most likely a panel discussion, we will also have workshops to advance the discussion. First, we'll deal with principles and theory. Secondly, with business practice and examples from business practice. And then tomorrow with the question, what about policy, media, and civil society? That is a threefold approach, which is grounded in our conviction that it's not enough to just think well. We also have to act well, and we have to learn from practice, and we also have to involve policy, media, and civil society issues. So if we talk about just business, that's not enough. And so it's a well-rounded package, I think, the way we're trying to go at it. Building on a common world ethos, how do we advance globally responsible business, will be opened by a keynote by Professor Leisinger. And then on panel 1, on world ethos as a foundation for globally responsible business, we reflect on world ethos ideas from different perspectives, from China, from our own institute, and also in a way apply to the future. What does it mean in the future, or for future ethical challenges? Then we'll have workshops on arguments for globally responsible business, globally responsible business practices, and workshop 2 will then discuss strategies to scale up globally responsible business practices. And tomorrow we'll have panel 3, the contributions of policy, media, and civil society, asking about a public agenda for globally responsible business practices, and in workshops focusing on building blocks of such a public agenda. Included here is, after workshop 3, we'll also have a keynote by Professor Höffe, a world-renowned philosopher here in Tübingen, who will talk about the world republic and what does it mean for business. And I think that's a very complementary and probably visionary outlook. We'll now have introductory remarks by Professor Klaus Dirksmeier. He's the professor of here at the Global Ethic Institute. He's the director of our institute. He's also an academic director of the Humanistic Management Center, a founding member of the Humanistic Management Movement. He's a member of the advisory board here in Tübingen at the International Center for Ethics in the Sciences and Humanities, and he's also academic fellow to the Bruce Henderson Institute at Boston Consulting Group in New York, and he is a member, as is Klaus Leisinger, of the Vatican's Ethic in Action Council. Klaus, it's up to you.
Thanks, Laffer. Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to Tübingen. I hope you like it here, and I hope you can all understand me well. If not, please do raise your hands. I have some very brief introductory remarks and just wanted to basically open up as your host here and set the stage for what we're doing here, our 5th annual conference together with the Humanistic Management Network. Our institute, this very institute, was founded in 2012 on the intellectual premises of the Projekt Weltethos, initiated by Professor Hans Küng, which examines the overlapping consensus of moral norms between and betwixt all the world's cultures and civilizations. Funded we are mainly by the Karl Schlecht Gemeinnützige Stiftung, our donor is right here, and institutionally our institute is part of the University of Tübingen, one of Germany's 11 Exzellenzuniversitäten. The fact that the annual conferences of the Humanistic Management Network are held here on the premises of this very institute reflects the strong complementarity between the World Ethos Project and the Humanistic Management Movement. At the core of ESA is the quest to bring moral values to bear in the practices of business. On our part, already in 2009 and spearheaded by Professors Küng, Leisinger and Wieland, the World Ethos Foundation promulgated a global economic ethic manifesto at the United Nations in New York in order to spell out the consequences of the idea of a world ethos for business. On part of the Humanistic Management Network, also since 2009, such ethical principles with intercultural validity have been implemented and operationalized through humanistic management and leadership. In the past years, at the previous joint conferences here in Tübingen, we examined specific transcultural values like integrity, prudence, and dignity. Building on that, we now turn our attention directly to the quest for a world ethos for global business. In the following days, we will address questions such as: which values comprise the world ethos? Does it allow for cultural variance and civilizational difference? How can it be conceptualized and communicated, evaluated and enacted, developed and defended, secured and scaled? Before, however, we delve deeper into these matters, by way of a short introduction by my friend and colleague Michael Pearson right here, I would briefly want to express my gratitude to all those who prepared this event. Our conference would not have been possible without the tireless work on part of many, many helpers, such as our institute staff and student assistants, as well as numerous friends and supporters. Amongst all these, though, one person stands out, and from your previous conversations via email or phone, you will already know of whom I speak. There is, I'm sure, virtually no one in this room who has not benefited immensely from the friendliness, professionalism, efficiency, and diligence of Hanna Schirowski. Hanna is the heart and soul of this conference. She held together all the lines of communication, coordinated dates and speakers, organized logistics and finances, scrutinized topics and themes, and on top of that, she was the ever-present, ever-congenial principal behind the scenes. It is to Hanna, therefore, that all of us, hosts as well as participants, owe immense gratitude. Dear Hanna, thanks a million for all you did. I hope this little gift can be a small token of our gratitude. Thank you very much, once again. And now off to new horizons, and Michael, you've got the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, Klaus. Thank you, Hanna. Thank you to the Weltethos-Institut, and Christopher, everyone here. It's a pleasure to come back here every year and talk about how these philosophical, theologically infused thoughts about the world ethos influence the practice of organizing. We call it the practice of organizing because we think management is really what we do in our lives. It's individually, it's between people, it's in organizations, it's in business, but it's beyond that. So we are all experiencing a world where we somehow can possibly say we are testing our basic principles of how we organize. And the guiding narrative that has gotten us to where we are is being questioned at many levels. And you see that the universalist approach of a neoliberal kind of agenda right now isn't really working all that well. It's breaking apart. You can see Brexit, you can see Trump, you can see Catalonia trying to split off Spain. You see all of these tendencies towards tribalism, where you see, you know what, a universalist agenda doesn't really seem to fulfill the promises to a degree that we thought it would or could or should. So what's going wrong? Well, there may not be a world ethos behind a neoliberal kind of agenda at this point, and I think that's precisely what we're trying to explore. What is it that we can actually do that unites us all? What are the principles that we can use to organize each other with each other that are normatively founded, that can bring us together, that don't divide us? We call these principles humanistic management, and they're founded on the idea that yes, we do honor the dignity of humans, of life in general, and that's a core principle, and we need to protect that dignity. In current market logic, of course, knows only price. And therefore, dignity, as that which represents intrinsic value, doesn't come into the equation. So we think that one of the outcomes of this world ethos narrative is really that protection of the dignity of life, the inherent value of human life. And out of that, we think you cannot necessarily maximize wealth as the objective function. You need to try to establish something that's higher, that sort of contributes to the common good. So these two principles guide what humanistic management stands for. It's the protection of dignity and the promotion of well-being. And we believe that that is something that can universally be shared, that's universally acceptable, and that can help us organize better. So we're here to test these ideas, and we're trying to organize our own thinking together with practitioners, with academics, with policymakers, because we believe those audiences typically don't talk to each other. And this is a wonderful forum here to just break down some of the silos and maybe the barriers that we all carry with us, and just explore what else can be done better. So I thank you all for being here. Thank you all for making this possible. And hopefully we'll have very rich conversations and maybe have some ideas of future action. So thank you very much. Again, I'll turn over to Lofa. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Let me now introduce our first speaker, Professor Dr. H.C. Klaus Leisinger. He will address a world ethos as compass for managers, thoughts on the practical application of a philosophical concept, and we're very happy to have him here. Michael just mentioned dignity as a founding and guiding value of the Global Ethic Project, as well as the Humanistic Management project, and that is enshrined in the first article of the Global Economic Ethic Manifesto, which was published in 2009 in New York, and of which Klaus Leisinger was one of the main authors. He has been an advisor to politics and a sought-after advisor by, you see here, Chancellor Brandt, you see Kofi Annan, the former UN General Secretary, and of course also Ban Ki-moon, the current UN General Secretary. Professor Leisinger teaches at, or used to teach at Basel. He's also in Notre Dame. He's the founding president of the Global Values Alliance Foundation, a special advisor on the Global Compact, member of the Leadership Council of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and a member of the Vatican's Ethic and Action Council as well. Many more functions, too long to list because we want to hear his topic and not my introduction. Klaus Leisinger, it's up to you, and we'll put up your presentation. Thank you.
Make knowledge into 40 years of practical experience. I worked 40 years for a large pharmaceutical multinational corporation, and I paralleled 25 years. I was a professor of business ethics and corporate responsibility at the University of Basel. And all I can tell you is they're all kind people on both sides of the equation, but they definitely think different and perceive different. And what I want to do in the only 35 minutes I have is giving you a perspective and say, you know, if it is like this, then what can we do? The world we are currently working and living in is a complicated one. We have growing social unrest. Look at Catalonia. We have increasing weather extremes. Look at the last hurricanes. We have increasing migration to an extent that we at the moment have the feeling we can't absorb. And I will tell you here and now, these are the good old times. That's the beginning of something that we will have to face, and in a different way than building fences. The new framework tries to keep up with this. The world community has about 2 years ago come up with 17 goals in the sense of this has to change. And everybody agrees to that, and I will come back to that again and again. It's easy to agree to abstract objectives. And it's even more easy to agree to abstract values. We are all good people. Yes, thank you very much. But what exactly does it mean? Now, if I want to deepen this thought, I have to talk at least 2 minutes on what is functional differentiation. In order to deal effectively with the world we have, the modern societies have embarked and have started to work in a kind of division of labor and division of responsibility. The totality of society's tasks and responsibility are split up, and what's done in the churches is different from what's done in the business, and what's done in the research is different than what's done in public administration. You find different people there who have different skills, different resources, and different values, and all together there should be a common denominator of basic values, and then we hope we have a functioning society. If you read the encyclical letter Laudato Si, you will find a lot of wonderful sentences, a lot of explicit values, and if you compare them with what's values in business, you find a difference. For example, he says, Pope Francis says, the challenges of sustainable development are profoundly moral. And I agree to that, and we can deepen that in discussion. Sustainable development expects you to do something today for a return on investment in the far future and for somebody else. That's not part of common business logic, that's not part of common political logic, and that's not part of human behavior. And it doesn't have to be instant gratification, but pretty instant. So, the principle of the common good in a world of injustice and deprivation of human rights is summons to solidarity. If you look at business, there is no solidarity, there is cutthroat competition on the market. Preferential option for the poor. Business is oriented according to who has purchasing power and how can we best get access to it. God gave the earth to the whole human race for sustenance of all its members. Business says private property, I can buy rainforest to cut it down. That's my right of property. Last but not least, the economy must serve the people, not the other way around. Love in social life must become the highest norm for all activities. Donald Trump would say, you must be joking. Now, what we should not do is moralize and say, on this side of the equation, there are all the holy moral people, and on the other side of the equation, there are all, not so moral people. It is important that we familiarize ourselves with business being a subsystem of society, and together with all the other substance does what has to be done. The business responsibility is relatively clear. It is first and foremost do no harm. And one could say, if it is do no harm, probably most 95% of the do no harm principles can be covered by adhering to the law. compete with integrity and apply applicable law. But modern societies expect more from companies today. It is not only do no harm. And I don't think you find any CEO standing in front of the media and say, by the way, I'm doing no harm. And then, by the way, who defines the harm and in what time perspective, that's another dimension of discussion. Good companies strive for legitimacy in the spirit of a world ethos, in the sense of if we do something in Germany, we want people to say, well, that's a good company, or that's a good leader, or, you know, that's a good management style. And we want the same in China and in India, in South America, and in North America. And that's difficult enough. And on top, we have something to do good. And a lot of American colleagues would say, well, that's not a function of an economic, of a business enterprise. We can discuss that, probably not here. But you know, basically that's my view of the world. Very importantly, and that is not only my life experience of 40 years, it is my deep conviction, it is not legal institutions that are moral or immoral, it is human beings that run these institutions. So it is men and women of goodwill in top positions who basically make or break everything that could be called value management. It is at the very top of the corporate hierarchy that a reflection process ought to start, in the sense of what exactly do we want? What is a non-negotiable value for us, and what does that mean? And it is then that you bring in other colleagues, that you define what are the policies and the codes of conduct. It is then that you go through the whole core competence management process and say, you know, if these are the values, then what exactly does it mean? And I will deepen that a bit more because it is so important. Now, yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, jetzt habe ich was falsch gemacht. Oh, scheiße. Okay, here we are. Da, gut. Okay. So, the English say the proof of the pudding is in its eating. And I tell you, the value of the value is in its application. I hear a lot of people talk about values, and then if it comes down to earth to next morning's decision, it seems to be another ball game. The two value principles, principle of humanity and principle of reciprocity, as well as the basic values and standards, non-violence, reference for life, fairness and just economic orders, truthfulness and tolerance, as well as partnership and gender justice. This is the big opus that Hans Küng and his colleagues has developed by filtering it out from all the cultures, all the religions, and over time. And it is very important because the basic message is here, we as a world family have much more in common than what separates us. And that's probably the most important starting point for any discussion within a society or trans society. However, you know, we are not alone in the world as company Putzmeister or Novartis or BASF. We are part of a worldwide competition that looks for cost pressure, that looks for time pressure. So the question importantly is here, where are the limits of good people, of individual managers who are willing to use the moral free space they have and to use moral imagination and to create management, value management. The normal value management process is, as I said, that the top guys are sitting together and say what is important for us, what is non-negotiable. Will be very interesting to see the coalition process in Germany, what is non-negotiable for the Greens, for the Liberals, and for the colleagues from Bavaria. And we all know that practical action at the end needs tolerance, needs compromise. Now, what is not compromisable? That is important here. Secondly, if that is important to us, what are the behavioral norms that we would expect from our people? What are we rewarding and what are we not rewarding? What kind of people do we want to attract to our company and whom should we ask to leave? Because you cannot proclaim a corporate culture and you cannot proclaim a value catalog and then have people who ostensibly work against that and that publicly. And if they make more money with that, you even reward them. This creates cynicism, and cynicism is not good for a corporate culture. Now, what is important is that first and foremost, companies have performance values. They want to be competent, they want to be innovative, they want to have quality. They need that to succeed at the marketplace. Carl Schlecht invented a concrete pumping machine some years ago, and that made all the difference to that market. This is why he became a world leader. You need not only innovation, you need to be able to transform your ideas into something that you can offer at the marketplace and that customers are willing to buy because they think it makes their life better. Secondly, you need cooperation value because you are not alone in the world. You need a supply chain. You need to get along with people, open, loyalty, team spirit, concern, and respect for others. When Klaus Dirksmeier and Christopher Gohl talked about, they said the word dignity. How often did you read the word dignity in a corporate pamphlet? Or how often do you hear it in a CEO talking at the General Share Assembly? If it is so important, as everybody would say, why then is it kind of between the lines? Communication values. We all know that we appreciate honesty, truthfulness. Carl Schlecht's 5-question probe. What is honest? You know, Adenauer once said there is honesty and there is full honesty and there is holy honesty. Thank you very much. What exactly are you talking about at the moment? In Basel, we had 2 companies, Siba and Sando, and one was predominantly Protestant, one was predominantly Catholic, and there was a difference in as much as both companies never lied, but only one company always told the whole truth. Is that honest? Is that truthful? Interesting. Let's discuss. Ethical values. Of course, we need integrity. Of course, we need responsibility and fairness. But it is so easy to agree to that on the general level. So, what I want you to know is if you proclaim these values, you will have to apply that on the economic sphere, on the social sphere, on the ecological sphere, on the human rights sphere, on the anti-corruption sphere. You will have to look at the corporate governance level, and if you do philanthropy, you have to do it there. This is how difficult it is, and there is no way around that. The worst thing that can happen to you in practice is that the company is proclaiming values and that the people in the company are cynical about it because they perceive their daily life to go totally different. And there are a lot of people who say, yeah, you know, we are all for values, but we first have to have sufficient profit to allow to have these values. What a ridiculous attitude. Now, one step further, if you mean business, you have to disaggregate, you have to contextualize, and you have to specify. Within the business sector already, if you talk about integrity, it is probably a different thing for a pharmaceutical company than for a cosmetics industry. Because patients are sick and do not have the consumer sovereignty. They need a drug. Whether or not you need a lipstick or not is up to your taste. Functions. There is not much room for discussing truthfulness if you talk to the finance department. There is obviously already more room if you talk to the marketing department. Now, how flexible do we want to be? This is obviously a corridor. It is not a line on which you have to walk. But how wide should the corridor be? Environmental protection. The fact that the water that leaves the company or the air that leaves the company in most of the companies is relatively clean today. But the CO2 that is generated, that has an impact on future generations, is not exactly where we want it to be. What does that mean with regard to doing no harm? And I'm not talking about Volkswagen. This has nothing to do with ethics. This is criminal act. They were lying, they were cheating, and they were doing things that are not allowed by law. I mean, come on. That's the legal minimum, that you don't do that. So let's not confuse things. And by the way, they were actively accepting health damage for children to save 1,800 euros per car. You know, that reminds me of the Ford Pinto case study. And yet the management is still there. And nobody has paid back any bonus. And nobody is in jail. For such a communism, for such a capitalism, we don't need communists. You know, if that's the way capitalism is going, it will be self-destructive. So, what exactly are we doing with regard to what consequences should that have? In all cases, and that's the important thing, it must have consequences for the selection of people. It must have consequences for the promotion of people. It must have consequences for target setting, for performance appraisals, for bonus setting. It must have consequences for corporate learning, case studies, lessons learned, dilemmas, not case studies in the sense of should I commit a crime or should I not commit a crime. Come on, that's a question of intelligence. But the dilemmas we are working with in business life are so much more difficult, because the question is not are you doing the best or the worst. The question is which is the least evil. If you do this, you have risks and benefit of a different kind than if you do that, but you have risks and benefits all the time. And it's the difference between a university professor and a business person and a founder like Carl Schlecht that you are willing to take a risk. That you basically also risk your financial existence if you put your money into that. So how much of a risk are we expecting from whom? Last but not least, consequences for communication, for stakeholder relations, and for public affairs. I worked many years for a pharmaceutical company, and 7 years in a row before I left the company, I lost the internal battle of adding a chapter to the yearly report on problems not solved, dilemmas to be shared. For the simple reason that there are always problems that are not solved. And there are always dilemmas you want to share. And it's not bad will, it's not lack of morals, it's not lack of imagination. It is sometimes very difficult. And if you live in today's complex stakeholder society, everybody seems to have a stake in a company. And, you know, if you talk to animal rights people, they have one kind of a stake. If you talk to the unions, it's another kind of a stake. If you talk to the shareholders, you have a third kind of a stake, and so on. You know, what exactly do we want? Truthfulness, honesty. Truthfulness and honesty means that we call a spade, and that we say we are doing this for the following reasons, and we are aware that this has consequences there and there, but in the long run we hope to go there. You know, you will still have people who will not agree to what you have been saying. However, they know what you mean and what you stand for, and that makes your life easier. And if you have guts, you stand up for what you believe and you fight for it. Talking about leadership, leadership is different from followership, and this is why it is more demanding. Let me give you as I said, I have practical experience in pharmaceutics. I was 30 years in the top management of those who did corporate responsibility, and I had black hair when I started. The point is that it's a permanent dialogue process. It's a dialogue process for the simple reason, it has to do with dignity. I want to know what you think and I want to know why you think that. It's only then that I can react to it. If I have my ideological convictions, I do not have to discuss because I seem to know what's right. And very often dialogues need time. I was part of a dialogue on the ethics of genetic engineering. In the first, it was organized by the Wirtschaftswissenschaftliche Zentrum in Berlin. The first year, industry, NGOs, academia was just singing their own national anthems. Everybody was, yeah, from my experience, it's this and this and this, and you must be wrong if you think differently. In the second year, they started to listen to each other in the sense of, that is a good argument. I've never heard that. Tell me more. And in the third year, we had a 70% consensus on something which nobody would have expected we would ever have. So far, the good story. But then they went home. The industry delegates went back to their headquarters, the NGO delegates went back to their headquarters, and then they were talking about the compromises we achieved. And at home were those who were not part of this learning process. They said, are you crazy? How can you agree to that? I mean, I didn't send you there to make compromise. I sent you there to sell our position. And at the end, there was not even a publication in the sense of this has been consensus and that is let's agree to disagree. So it's very important that we listen. I am part of a European research project on what are ethical trials, what are ethical conditions for clinical trials in low-income countries. Believe it or not, it always starts with language. The official language is one does not talk about patients and one does not talk about participants in clinical trials. One calls these people research subjects. Give me the language and I tell you what is the underlying reason. If the questions are, they are poor, very poor people whose only chance to get good medical treatment is to participate in a trial. Now we have the Helsinki principles who say we need informed consent. How much of an informed consent is a poor person likely to give or to think about if and when she has cancer and is in a trial? Innovative cancer treatment is available. What about pediatric trials? Most of the adult medicine cannot be just broken down and give it proportionally to a child because children have a different metabolism. So you need to have clinical trials with children in developing countries. The word as such is already in a philosophical department of a university, there is sheer outrage. How dare you do that? Well, there is no alternative. The question is not, are you doing it or not? The question is, what are ethical conditions? Who is responsible for what? There are children, there are parents who are selling their children to medical trials, to 2 or 3 parallel medical trials for the simple need of money. If something goes wrong, no company can say, it's the parents' fault. Might be, but it's not a legitimate excuse for a company. So what should companies be doing? What is it with regard to the hiring processes? What kind of people do we want to have? What are the performance criteria? What are the target setting? How much of the talking do you expect? And how much of the understanding do you expect? Then a very simple question, and if I would ask you, I would get probably 99% saying the right thing, and yet it's not done. If you have a sick person with a chronic disease in a trial, and that person realizes how wonderful this drug is, and the trial is finished, would we expect that this company gives access to this innovative drug to the patients who participated in the trials? We would say, of course, you know. The fact is no. The fact is once the trial is over, the company says, thank you very much. What is the responsibility in the sense of a world ethos if and when we say reference for life? It would cost the company relatively little because the billion they have spent are sunk cost. So it's active ingredients and logistics. Is it asked too much to say, of course, reference for life of the patient who helped us to register the drug through participating in trial should have the benefit of continued access to that medicine after the trial. That's not law. But it is also do no harm, because you implicitly do harm by withdrawing something from somebody whom you know is benefiting of it. I do not want to bore you with this, but what I want to explain to you is, come on, stop talking about general values. Let's start a dialogue on the specificities. What does it mean to have intellectual property and reference for life if you are a pharmaceutical company? That's the difference to the cosmetic industry or to the concrete industry. Every company has a different impact on society and on human beings, and we will have to take this impact serious, and we will have to diversify and to specify these things. How are we managing dilemmas and conflicting values? Because that's the daily reality you have as a business person. You have permanent dilemmas and permanent conflicting values. And I'm not going to deepen that here. Maybe there's another opportunity. But if you live in a Chinese society or in a South African society where giving a gift is part of paying respect to an elder person or to a political decision maker or ethnic decision maker. And if you have at the same time a compliance manager who says that's nepotism, that's corruption, we have to get rid of that person. The most ridiculous thing you can do as a Western intellectual is moralize. That's easy, but that doesn't solve anything. Understand both sides and find a solution. That's management. And if you can't change the values because you don't want to, change the process. There are many innovative ways of handling things. And by the way, become transparent. Explain why you are doing what you are doing. Yes, that's an additional burden on any management. Yes, if you talk to manager, they will all tell you, God, I have so much work. I'm busy 120% by just doing what my company expects me to do. The answer would be, that is also something that your company expects you to do. It's not a layer. It's not something on the cake, icing on the cake. It is integral to the business. And then it has consequences because there is no free lunch. If the local regulatory framework is insufficient to protect the dignity, we have a caste society in India where people perceive themselves of being of a different quality. That might be an Indian cultural fact. However, we as an international company should not exploit this. If we say the dignity of the people is the same, the Harijanis are as important to us as the Brahmans. What does that mean for the structure of our employment? What does that mean for the employability for the funds we are investing for employability? Now, I have, in order to prepare myself for this clinical trials research contract, I have been attending a lot of trials in Nigeria, in India and in Bangladesh. And you learn most if you sit at the bedside table, because then it's no longer an abstract thing. You have somebody there who expects something from this trial. And how are we making sure that we have the right people sitting at the bedside table? It has to do with empathy. It has to do not with the research subject. It has to do with a suffering human being. And that makes all the difference. How are we preventing the watering down of accountability? Normally, a company makes a pharmaceutical company making a medical trial, sources it out to a clinical research organization in India that sources it out to a university teaching hospital, that sources it out to the oncological department, that gives it to the young doctor who wants to make a dissertation. And if something goes wrong, we sack him or her. What a ridiculous approach. Accountability should be with those who benefit economically. So, can a pharmaceutical company make sure through compliance that we have this all in order? Yes, they can. Will it cost money? Yes, it will. Is there an alternative? I don't think so. Now, it starts with voluntariness. You know, if your child is sick and your only chance to get a proper diagnosis and hopefully a treatment is to participate, is that voluntary? We pay medical students in Basel 2,500 Swiss francs per month if they participate in medical trials. If we would pay the same in southern India, we would create a new industry. However, if we pay less, what does that mean with regard to the value of human beings and the dignity? Would we have to make a purchasing power related calculation? Yes, we would. There is no register in India at the moment, so we do not know who in India is at the moment participating in any kind of a trial. That means that somebody in Bangalore can also participate in a medical trial in Mumbai or in Madras, and nobody knows. Well, if there is not a national registry, the pharmaceutical company should put up one. You cannot hide behind lacking law, and you cannot hide behind bad law as a good company. Well, I told you, men and women of goodwill. It is something Carl Schlecht has been hammering in all the time. Don't talk about business ethics, don't talk about economic ethics. It's the ethics of the people who carry responsibility in business. And this is exactly the right thing to do. What do we need? We need people who, first of all, are aware of complexities, are aware of the fact that value management includes dilemmas, are mindful and respectful in situations where they deal with other people's other interests, other cultural backgrounds, other ideological convictions. It has to do with tolerance of ambiguity. It has to do with ethical musicality. We need people who feel if something goes wrong. I'm sure all of you have already experienced a situation where in a different culture, you talk to somebody and all of a sudden your counterpart freezes. And you know something has been wrong, but you don't know what. The normal thing is, John, I see you changed. Did I do something wrong? It's done. Behave normal. Don't behave in a professional role where you cannot admit to know everything. It's an absolute ridiculous disguise behind which a lot of mistakes are happening. Well, last slide, just to annoy you, you need a business case for that. Black sheep, a white sheep will not survive in a black herd. This is as simple as that. And if you have cost pressure, if you have time pressure, and if the rest of the competitors are doing have a totally different understanding of the game, Andreas Suchanek will talk about that tomorrow, amongst other things, is you will have to be very careful. Also the world ethos, that's a societal approach. The Sustainable Development Goals, that's a societal reform process. Yes, business has its obligations and duties and responsibilities, but everybody else too. We have consumers in Germany who moralize about the Bangladeshi textile industry just to go to Kick and buy jeans for €9. I mean, put your money where the mouth is. Don't allow different standards just because it's so much easier to moralize. The point is here, yes, there is a business case. I think so. If you live your values, if you are open, you attract different people to your company than if you have a cutthroat organization that gives bonuses on quarterly results. Secondly, you have value-conscious employees that trust each other. that do not hide something they know because they think, I keep that knowledge for me because it gives me a competitive advantage. They put it on the table and say, friends, I have an idea. What is your thought on that? It's attractive for ethically motivated investors, and the number of these is rising. It is proactive issue management in the sense of you prevent things. If you would have a speak-up culture at Volkswagen, the issue would have been on the table, not under the table, and you would have time to react to it before the American Environmental Protection Agency is sending its agents. Restoring trust and preserving corporate freedom. Today, about 50% of the population in all the industrial and developing and emerging countries do not trust that business is working to the best interest of society. And that's simply not something you can continue to have. Now, the business case rests on assumptions. The assumption is, first of all, you have an agreement to the validity of the set of values you talk about. That is Hans Küng's achievement. There is a broad, at least general agreement to that. Secondly, you need a differential judgment of media, a differential judgment of consumers, a differential judgment of the political people, because this is not, the industry or business is a very heterogeneous affair, and you find companies that are in excellence and there are companies who are not. Willingness of other societal actors to co-create a values-driven preferential solutions. The point is, we are facing the most comprehensive societal reform process with the Sustainable Development Goals. I read yesterday in the Handelsblatt that the German and the Swiss banks expect that 1/3 of the jobs will get lost through to digitalization over the next 5 years. We will have, as usual, losers and winners of change. And we will, if we do not carefully talk about it, truthful, if we do not apply solidarity with solutions, if we don't stretch solutions over a longer time, we will have a political impact as we had 2 weeks ago. And those parties who go back to nationalistic and to protectionistic parties, they do not have solutions. They know what's wrong, but they do not know what's right. And this is why that will, deepen the problem. Let me conclude. The first important step is let's formulate the values and let's make sure it's known what we stand for. The second step is what exactly does it mean? For that you need an company internal dialogue, for that you need a company external dialogue, and for that you need a societal dialogue with different stakeholders. And let's be modest and let's be honest. And for once I will quote a politician. It was Joe Biden, the former US Vice President, who once said, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Leisinger, for this introduction, not only to the world ethos ideas, but also to its practice. And I think it became clear that it is a world ethos, not a heavens ethos, and it requires specification, it requires context, it requires application. That's a long and hard process for corporate governance and for corporate dialogue. Now we will take time for about 2 to 3 questions, and we'll also have Professor Leisinger present, of course, for the following panel discussion when we open the floor for a broader discussion. But 2 or 3 questions in regard to his presentation are welcome. I saw Waldemar Pauls here. Go ahead.
School in Germany, University of Mannheim, and I learned values there that has nothing to do with that. So one important point is for me, we're here at Tübingen, it's also an excellence cluster. how do you strike the balance between excellence and inclusion? That's my point where I'm trying to find a solution. I've researched, I disintegrated, I try to analyze and understand how to reach people for the last 4 years already. And one point which is really striking is narcissism. And it's a collective, I'd say, epidemic, which has a lot to do with excellence. So my question is, we're here in Tübingen. What's your answer to this excellence cluster things? How do I connect that to the notion of universal value? Because if you focus on excellence, there's so much entitlement going on attached to excellence, which is, from my point of view, very, very dysfunctional.
The short answer is, if people derive rights from privileges, it's the wrong approach. You should derive duties from privileges. The fact that you are brighter, the fact that you were luckier in your life, should be an attitude that I am aware of that, it makes me humble, and I want to contribute as much as possible to other people who have been less fortunate and who are less. It has to do, I know narcissism. And narcissism can be extremely destructive. And you know, narcissism, I do not want to name, you all have your own examples. The point is, this is not exactly team building, it is not exactly co-creation proposing, and you know, it's a lack of truthfulness, because truthfulness would say, come on, you know, calm down a little bit, just relax, don't think you are the greatest. I mean, it's easier for me because I am, but the point is, you know, let's talk about narcissism. Let's talk about what does it mean to feel an obligation to those who are less fortunate than you are, and most of the problems can be solved there. But yes, it was the Lord's intention to have a Gauss distribution of intelligence, of attitude, of everything. And I just think, you know, that those who are better off for whatever reasons should have an attitude of being grateful, being humble, and helping those who have been less fortunate, because then together, eventually they are also depending on support from their own group.
I saw another question by Professor Suchanek, and one last question, and by Ernst Klimakowicz. We'll have them both together, okay?
First of all, many thanks, Klaus. This was very inspiring, very rich in content. And it reminded me on a quote from Oscar Wilde, interestingly, namely, morals is like art to draw a line someplace. I'd like to translate that into another idea, namely, you have to make some compromises in business and also in politics and in life in general. And at the same time, you said so rightly, some things are non-negotiable. So some compromises should not be made, must not be made. Do you have a hint for us where to draw the line?
The simple line is international norms and local law. Under no circumstances should you violate law, and under no circumstances should you violate international norms that go beyond local law. The rest, Andreas, is difficult, because I do not want value missionaries and value imperialism coming from a very subjective point of view. I have very often in the United States, I ran into people who basically were of the opinion, I know what's best for the rest of the world, and I have doubts whether that's an appropriate attitude. So it's law and it's international norms.
And we have the last question by Ernst von Klimakowicz. Stand up and raise your voice loud. You have a loud voice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Klimakowicz, the point is the time frame. a lot of good things will not pay back in the short term. I had the privilege of working for a company that was 250 years old. So the next quarterly result is a bit relative. But most of the people, it's this famous quote that we dance on the dancing floor as long as the music plays. There is a business case for doing short term the wrong thing, but it's not a business case for doing it in the long run. Okay, let me finish with a small story that I want you to give as a homework to reflect upon. Somewhere in the mountains of China, there lived an old man who knew the right answer to every question that was posed to him. And as usual, there were two young boys in the village who didn't really like that. And they were sitting together and said, we will prove that this guy does not know everything all the time. So they were thinking, and then they came forward and they were catching a bird. And one of them were holding the bird behind the back, and the other one asked the old man, what do I have behind my back? And the old man smiled and he said, it's a bird. And the second question was, and that was the loaded question, is it alive or is it dead? And if he would say it's alive, he would kill it with his hand. And if he would say it's dead, he would let it fly. So they asked the old man, is it alive or is it dead? And the old man smiled and he said, it's all in your hands. And that it's world ethics in practical life, it's all in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Klaus Leisinger, for setting the stage for what is now to follow. And I asked Jonathan Kier to come up. He will facilitate our panel on world ethos as a foundation for business practice with Professor Van Heping, myself, and John Della Costa. And I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Christopher. Good morning, everybody. There's not a planned break in the program until lunchtime. Christopher, do we want to organise maybe a toilet break either now or after the three presentations? The plan is we're going to have three presentations, no more than 15 minutes for each speaker, and then hopefully a fairly long discussion period. If anybody needs, there's no break schedule. If anybody desperately needs a cup of coffee or a bathroom break, you may have to just take your own liberty, find a gap in the schedule. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Van Heping from Southeast University in Nanjing, China. Professor Fan is Professor of Management and the author of the book Chinese Humanistic Management, or that's what it would be called if the book had been translated. It's a pleasure for us to have, for the Humanistic Management Network, to welcome him here. He has conducted a very wide-ranging survey, empirical survey of values and the evolution of values among the Chinese population. He's going to talk about that briefly here, and with emphasis on entrepreneurship and trust for entrepreneurs and for business people in China, and Chinese attitudes to business. Professor Fan will be followed by Christopher, who you've already seen today and whose face you will be sick of if you live in Tübingen, because he's been on all the FDP billboards for the last 2 months. And then John Della Costa will be the third speaker in the panel. John was recommended to us by Professor Len Swidler, who's made the trip from Temple University. Len is one of these stuffy academic theologians, and he was very keen to say John is a guy who can be the bridge between academia and business, which is what we're all talking about. So we've got three very, very different but very interesting and hopefully complementary speakers. And Professor Fan, we welcome you. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to your talk.
Chairs, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to have this opportunity to introduce my paper. My paper's topic is the transformation path of Chinese ethical morals and the ethical conundrums of enterprises and entrepreneurs. This paper is combined two parts. Part one, the transformation path of Chinese ethical morals in modern China. and Part 2, ethical conundrums of enterprises and our ethical support. These data are from our 5 sevens. In nearly 10 years, I, together with my academic group, such as Professor Wang, the Dean of Humanistic College, Southern University, and Dr. Zhang, finished 5 sermons about today's China ethical and moral condition. This is 5 sermons about today's China ethical and morals. From these sermons, we make 5 very important conclusions and 5 findings. Finding 1, about cultural identity. We found ethical culture is still dominant in current Chinese society. There are from 3 evidence, religious and ethical relationships and ethical attitudes and moral rationality. Found 2, horizon of ethical and morals and their transformer trajectory. We found stick to tradition in ethical, but aspiring to modern standards in morals. This is 5 most important ethical relationships in today's China. We name the new 5 ethical relations. First, parents and children. Second, spouse. Third, siblings. Fourth, individual and nations. 5th, friends. This is from 3 servants. So the decaying rate of traditional value only 20%. But on the other hand, there are 5 most important virtues. I named the new 5 virtues. The first, love. Second, honesty. Third, responsibility. Fourth, justice. 5th, tolerance. The decreasing rate of traditional value still to 50%. This is from 3 servants. So we can make the transformation trajectory of ethical and morals. It's a reverse movement, stick to traditional in ethics, but aspiring to modern standard. This is ethical. This is morality. This is trajectory. Find the 3. We found the family is an absolute foundation of our ethical and morals. What kind of ethical relationship is fundamental of to maintain social orders and the individual's life? First, or the servants. First, family relations. The second, relationship between individuals and the society. Third, the relationship between individuals and the nations. This is servants 3. Find 4. Ethical relationship and the moral justice. We found just crisis is in mainstream group. The most unjust group recreating ethical and morals. All servants. First, government office. Second, businessmen and entrepreneurs. Third, entities. This is three servants data. The government officers is first. The businessman is second. The entrepreneur is third. 5. Social ethical issues. We found unfair distribution and officer corruption are two major social ethical problems. This is unfair distribution. This is officer corruption. This is solved. So we found the attempt towards corruption income gap. We can find the change very, very large. This is data from servant 2. This is data from servant 3. We can find a turning point has happened in today's China. Part 2. Counting dreams of enterprises and entrepreneurs. Counting dreams 1. About ethical ideas in enterprises. How to seek idea type. About 100 years ago, a German scholar, Max Weber, make idea type. It's the Protestant ethical and market economy. There are 3 cultural elements: calling, growth, thrift. They are about the legitimacy and the necessary second profit, the rationality of second profit, and the possibility of accumulating capital. In the traditional Chinese culture, the idea type is the secular, ethical, and the market economy. There are also 3 elements: hard work, thrifty, and righteousness. They are about motivation of creating wealth and its secular jurisdictions, and the constraint of luxury and the possibility of accumulation, and the second profit reasonably and the distribution was third. How to seek idea type for today's enterprises and entrepreneurs? I think we should to build ultimate consortium and the ultimate consortium of worth for enterprises and entrepreneurs. In the Western civilization, the China civilization, they are ultimate concern. This is the Western ultimate concern from the Bible. This is Chinese ultimate concern from Confucius. Too much, not moral. The ultimate consistency in the Western civilization. What is the Chinese civilization's ultimate consistency? I don't know. So today's Chinese price and entrepreneurs have an ultimate expectation because ethical legitimacy and the ultimate motivation of creative work. They must to build ethical legitimacy and the ultimate motivation of creative work. Confucius taught about the character of entrepreneurs, how to get rid of the too-hao temperament. In today's China, too-hao is a very popular language and a very, very popular concept. It criticizes the deficiency of Chinese entrepreneurs. Its characteristic is rich but uneducated, don't serve the richness. It means too much money, make too much money, but uneducated, but no culture. So it's the ethical implication, the loss of culture and unfair distribution. This is moral, this is ethical. It shows a special social mentally, gentle qualities, and kind contempt. So we answer an important question. Is this deficiencies of thought or a deficit of the time? I think it's the deficiency of the first generation of the entrepreneurs in the era of reform of opening up. It's the crisis, the myth of culture and the ethical idea, such as speculation, flood their words, depend consumer passion. So today's China entrepreneurs have to get rid of the too hot temperament. How to get rid of the too hot temperament? I think entrepreneurs ask sprint and ask temperament of their entrepreneurs have to build. Because between there are differences between entrepreneurs and the businessmen. This is special in Chinese traditional culture. Between economic entities and the social instrument, between the unity of strength and the best motivation, unity right news and the benefits. Column 3 about the life course of enterprises, how to step out of the Fukuyama course. About 20 years ago, now Fukuyama, a professor, American professor from Harvard University, he made a very important academic point. He said, the words of Chinese family doesn't last 3 generations because they are, in Chinese enterprises, there is a set type structure. There are 3 cultural deficiencies of Chinese enterprises. 1, sons and offspring. Stability of family property. Don't just people outside of the family. And hence it's hard to establish professional management system. So it's almost the destiny. The worst of Chinese family doesn't last 3 generations. But in today's China, the private entrepreneurs is very, very important. They play a very important role in today's Chinese economic system. It's the current situation. The current situation is 50%. 50%. The first generation of entrepreneurs after the reform and the opening up transfer their dealership to their church. Their contribution rate of private enterprises is over 50. But on the other hand, the model of father to son succession faces a crisis. Over 50 of the second generation refuse to carry on their parent business. So today's China enterprises and today's Chinese entrepreneurs meet 2 hardships. 1, The words of family doesn't last 2 generations. The intergenerational affairs become worse. How to step out of the Fukuyama course? I think only by just. This is in enterprises and entrepreneurs' redemption. Because in today's China, in today's Chinese enterprises, there is a present dilemma about just. One, the society doesn't just enterprises and entrepreneurs. Two, but the entrepreneurs don't just outsiders. So the task must be done by entrepreneurs. One task. Work hard to gain ethical recognition of society. To task. Achieving self-resilience to gain ethical recognition of society. So I think the path to resilience of Fukuyama course is to establish modern enterprises system by expanding their just network. This is my paper. From this paper, we can make 2 conclusions. Conclusion 1. A cultural transformation of ethics and morals is process in China. And the entrepreneurs need ethical enlightenment and ethical assistance. We must give entrepreneurs ethical assistance. Conclusion 2. The ethical consistency will be last resort of Chinese entrepreneurs in the ethical Chinese culture. Time is over. Thank you very much.
就是他们可以提3个问题。
他们马上所以3个人讲完一起。对对。
Thank you, Professor Van Epping. I was already introduced. I'll find my own presentation. If you could help me out here real quick. Well, thank you for giving us a window in the Chinese discussion on ethics and the entrepreneur. Some of the problems sound familiar when I think about family-owned businesses. We do share similar challenges. Here, world ethos, a disposition to trust and innovate productively and prudently, a presentation with which I would like to add to the discourse that has come before me and highlight some of the important points that we have on the research agenda here and try to connect it to different discourses. And I hope I can give you a sort of a foundation for the discussion that's taking place in the following 2 days. Just a brief reminder, because not everyone knows it, so it's a historical brief, and I will be brief. The Global Ethic Project by Professor Hans Küng has been launched in 1990. He thought that world society needs unifying and binding norms, values, ideals, and goals, and he was looking towards religions in order to find a common ground or a common elements of a common ethic of elementary principles. I call it Decency 101. And the principles of the Global Ethic Project were that there can be no peace between nations without peace between the religions, no peace between the religions without dialogue, and there can be no dialogue without an investigation, understanding of the foundations of religions, which is what we are also doing here, the research and fostering the dialogue. Professor Küng looked at 3 religious streams: Chinese religions, Indian religions, and Near Eastern Near Eastern religions, in order to identify the 6 elements, what we call 2 plus 4, the 2 principles and 4 values that Professor Leising has already mentioned: the principle of humanity, to treat humans as human beings, the golden rule of reciprocity, and the 4 values: the pursuit of nonviolence with respect for life, justice with an imperative of solidarity, truthfulness, which comes with tolerance, and partnership among the sexes in a mutual esteem. That is not a minimal ethical consensus in a Rawlsian sense, but it is more of an elementary ethical consensus. And as many of you know, probably not everybody, it was enshrined, this concept, this idea, in the Declaration Toward a Global Ethic by the Parliament of World's Religions in 1993. Again, those 2 plus 4 principles and values. In 1995, the Global Ethic Foundation was established, and since 2000, we've had the Global Ethic Lecture at the University of Tübingen. And in 2012, with the help of sponsorship of Karl Schlecht, our institute was created. Now, in 2009, and this was already mentioned earlier, on an initiative by the Weltethos Foundation, Hans Küng, in dialogue with Karl Schlecht, who requested a statement of such kind, and led by Professor Wieland and Professor Leisinger, a common vision of legitimate and fair global economic practice with rules of conduct was formulated. It's based on the 2 plus 4 principles and values. So if you look at the certain articles of application, you will find them spelled out. What does it mean for the business context? And there's actually a German version of this in your conference papers. There's also an English version, which you can find online. It was presented in a symposium at the UN headquarters in New York under the joint sponsorship of the UN Global Compact Office, the Swiss Permanent Mission to the United Nations, and the Novartis Foundation for Sustainable Development. And it has crafted or started a wide-ranging debate about the merits of such a global economic ethic manifesto. To give Weltethos a space or a place, I think it's we like to discuss it in the context of 3 levels: the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. Weltethos organizes our conduct in economic life or in life, our own life, our everyday life with others, and our life in society. And of course, that has to do with one another. We have individuals here, we have interactions on the meso level, we have institutions on the societal level, we have character and consciousness on the individual level, conventions and habits of the heart, so customs on the meso level, and constitutions on the life of society. We have rights and responsibilities, we talk about civic virtues, we talk about the rule of law on different levels. We think of a citizen, we think of communities and corporations, which could be corporate citizens. We think of a republic, we'll talk about a republic tomorrow, a world republic. So those are different discourses, and they have to do on one hand with recognition of the individuality, which is also a main starting point for the Global Economic Ethic Manifesto of 2009. It starts with the individual and his or her responsibility. But of course, we got to recognize the diversity in society and try to, have organize this with the principle out of many, one. On the individual level, we talk about emancipation, on societal level, more about evolution, and of course we try to organize this on a societal level as progress. And there are different ethics, for example, virtue ethics or community and business ethics. And political ethics, they also overlap, but those are some of the streams, I think, and it's helpful to understand the space and place, which we're discussing here at the Institute, which is basically we're looking at the first 2 at the micro level and the meso level. And tomorrow we'll also have Professor Suchanek. He'll talk more about the macro level of the rules, the framework, the regulatory framework. That is important, but that is one space here that we discussed. Now, the argument I want to make about Weltethos in business is that it is anchored and transmitted in time-tested human convictions and customs, and that in that sense it's a collective practice, Weltethos, but is also a personal disposition. And I like to focus on this. It's a personal disposition which builds trust among fellow human beings. It lowers conflict costs and propels cooperative productivity in diverse and intercultural teams. So that is a question of culture, of business culture or corporate culture. It cultivates societal engagement as a stakeholder, and it drives innovative business models. And I like to discuss this in the context of 3 layers of the world ethos argument. We have the 2+4 principles and values, of course, as a core at the center. This is complemented by an understanding of Weltethos as an individual disposition of a voluntary global responsibility. If you have a disposition of Weltethos, it cannot be forced. It is voluntary, right? And if it is voluntary, it is about using one's freedom in a globally responsible way. So that there is freedom, but it's not an egotistic freedom. It is a freedom that we use in a globally responsible way, one might say in a cosmopolitan responsibility. That means that it also sets free the energies of creative and entrepreneurial global responsibility. This freedom, Weltethos as a disposition of voluntary global responsibility, of a freedom that is used in a globally responsible way, is also the space for moral imagination, as Professor Leisinger has pointed out. It is the space where we can be creative and change things and decide differently, decide to establish another business model, another logic, bring something else into the world. So that is on a very fundamental level, even beyond the practice of truthfulness, of partnership, of justice, of nonviolence, of humanity and the golden rule, the principle of humanity and the golden rule. That is a disposition of a voluntary use of freedom in a responsible manner. And then thirdly, world ethos. If you practice truthfulness, partnership, justice, nonviolence, humanity, and the golden rule, then it is also a practice of dialogue. Now, this has been apparent in the first, when I showed you the Hans Küng's approach to dialogue. Has always been part and parcel of the Global Ethic Project. And I'm glad Len Swidler is here from the Dialogue-Institut, and Howard Cohen, our friends from Philadelphia, partners in this endeavor, Len, for many years with Hans Küng. So you've always promoted that idea of the importance of dialogue, and I think it is a very important idea also for us, for Klaus Dirksmeier, who has written much about a different understanding of freedom, the responsible use of freedom, most in his recent books on qualitative freedom and on different paradigms in management and humanistic management. The idea of freedom exercised responsibly needs a dialogue in order to say what's, or to concretize, to spell out things, as we've heard from Klaus Leisinger. Is a very important part of applying the global ethic values. If we look at this, what does it mean? First of all, well, truthfulness, partnership, and the practice of those 2+4 values, it builds and breeds trust. It is a bridge to building trust among people, not only because we can trust that there is a common humanity to us on a meta level, but also because practicing truthfulness, practicing partnership, practicing justice, and doing so in a nonviolent way, and recognizing the humanity of the other, and thinking and reflecting with the golden rule, builds a reliability and builds a decent form of cooperation with which we can learn to trust. And it's not only about how to build trust in your business, within your corporate culture. I think it's also about public trust in business. And the importance of that trust, we've heard not only from Professor van Heping, but also from Francis Fukuyama here, who wrote this book on the importance of trust in 1995. He says, Trust arises when a community shares a set of moral values in such a way as to create expectations of regular and honest behavior. So there needs to be a shared set of moral values. Hurley argues that high-performing world-class companies are almost always high-trust environments. Now I can only touch on that, but that's a very important first function, I think, of the global ethic values and principles. It builds and breeds trust. It also lowers conflict cost and drives cooperative productivity in diverse and intercultural teams, and has to do with it being a practice of dialogue. We've had a presentation here, I think 2 years ago, on prudent business by Alexander Insam, one of our partners here at the Global Ethic Institute. And again, I can only touch on that argument. He is from the KPMG. He's an advisor. And he is famous for coming up with conflict studies, asking how much does conflict actually cost. And he estimates that about 25% of the costs, up to 25% of the cost, and depending, of course, in which business you're in, if you're a personal intensive business, then it's much more. Up to 25% of the cost of a business are actually conflict related. So if you can lower conflict, which is starting with people feeling sick, it's the time spent in unnecessary conflict where you cannot be productive and so on and so forth. Up to 25% of the costs are conflict costs, and he offers a way to reduce it. We've actually collaborated with him on the idea of cooperative excellence, and he's held a summit here at the Pepperdine University about 2 years ago on that very idea of cooperative excellence, which we came up with here in discussions. As you know, there are arguments about the diversity of teams, of intercultural teams. Are they productive or not? Many people assume, yes, they are more productive because they may bring more perspectives to the table. Well, research shows they are productive under certain circumstances. And among those certain circumstances is a common vision that they need to have, and it is common values that they need to share. So what I'm saying is the global ethic values are actually driving productivity in diverse and intercultural teams. If they're absent, they can be counterproductive. But in that sense, the world ethos values, they lower conflict costs, they drive cooperative productivity in diverse and intercultural teams. Third argument here, the cultivating of societal engagement as a global stakeholder. We think of Weltethos as practice of dialogue. The common argument is in the stakeholder perspective. Of course, the whole stakeholder discourse is one that we're related to, or that we relate our global ethic argument to. It is that businesses create value together with and for all stakeholders. So that business managers are actually social managers organizing interactions, fruitful and beneficial interactions with their stakeholders. That is the traditional stakeholder perspective. Another stakeholder perspective which we like to complement is that really businesses are themselves stakeholder of global society and should view themselves as stakeholder themselves of global society. So that is asks and calls for cultivating societal engagement as a stakeholder, not only engaging your own stakeholders, but also partaking in being engaged in the engagement as stakeholder of a shared global society. Now, the last point is driving innovative business models, and it builds on this idea of voluntary global responsibility, on using one's freedom in a globally responsible way. And as I've already said, this opens up the space of moral imagination and of coming up with different ideas. And we discussed this in the context of, what does it mean to do good in business, or how to conduct business responsibly? And of course, and we've seen this in Professor Leisinger's presentation as well, philanthropy is one way of business owing up to its responsibility. Bill Gates, giving away, actually investing 24 billion in the solution of problems, global problems that have nothing to do with Microsoft. Compliance is one way of doing the right thing, which is doing the right thing according to law. CSR, as we've heard from Professor Leisinger, spelled out across the corporate governance structure, but also spelled out across the corporate culture, is a way of instilling and promoting values and their practice within the corporation. And I think what we're especially fond of here at the Global Ethic Institute, where we try to promote and have case studies, and I'm happy that in practice we'll actually have examples of social entrepreneurship, of social businesses, which actually change their business models in order or craft their business models as an intervention into a world that needs, a certain help, a certain product, a certain problem solution, thereby creating value, adding to value that is needed, solving global problems through business. So it's not about doing things within your organization, right? It's also about actually about a strategy, about a product innovation that is geared towards solving global problems. There are examples of this, and we'll discuss this later. But social entrepreneurship, yet another type, and a very interesting type, I think, of corporate responsibility. Now, or business responsibility. What is interesting about the social entrepreneurship that's actually created a mirror for traditional corporations who then detect that many a times this is also a motive for them for the way they conduct business, and even more traditional forms of corporations will find that ethical motivations actually drive their own innovations, their own products, and open up new markets. There are examples later in the discussion that I can give, but I think that's a very interesting complementary perspective, driving innovative business models because you are inclined to use your freedom in a globally responsible way, because you're, as an entrepreneur, you're creative, you have entrepreneurial energy, and do so with a view to global problems and global challenges. Now, to sum this up, I think world ethos in business is about creating value with each other for a better world. As we like to say at the Humanistic Management Network, it's H to H, it's humans to humans. Human beings cooperate with human beings and for human beings. They do so with the values that Hans Küng wrote up. In a sense, they're cooperative, they are decent with one another, they foster trust, they're being productive, they lower conflict costs together. But they're also promoting a value for a better world, adding value to a better world. The business of business is not business, it is value for a better world. I showed you the layers of the world ethos argument, going from the core, the 2+4 principles and values, its base, the idea of this voluntary global responsibility, which I think is part and parcel of the World Ethos Project, and it is always a practice of dialogue. And I think the functions of World Ethos in practice can be mapped along those lines. Not entirely, maybe we'll see, and not exclusively the way I told the story, but those are the highlights of our work that I would like to add. For final conclusion, my argument was that anchored and transmitted in time-tested human convictions and customs, world ethos is a personal disposition which builds trust among fellow human beings, lowers conflict costs, and propels cooperative productivity in diverse and cultural teams. It cultivates societal engagement as a stakeholder, and it drives innovative business models. Thank you very much. John, yes. Let's get John on.
Thank you. While this is being set up, as an ethicist, I'm going to actually do a moral interruption in our program. I'm going to ask everybody to just stand. Please stretch. Please take a deep, deep, deep breath. And in the process, because we are receiving so much information, just allow the heart to dialogue with what you've heard. Just appreciate the amount of wisdom that's been transmitted in just a few hours in what will be a 2-day engagement. Because we do need that appropriation process as well if we are going to grow both the technical and the moral aptitude to deal with these issues that are before us. So if everyone's taken a deep breath, I'll now start my timer and get on to my presentation. So thank you, everyone, for trusting me with that intervention. We've heard a lot about the moral ethos. And we've heard about, in Christopher's presentation, this architecture, this approach has been around for over 20 years. And so one of the issues that we have to ask ourselves is, what is going on that we're still talking about it and still learning how to practice it, while the obviousness of it, and in fact case histories supporting the business argument, are already being made. So while I wanted to reflect on the world ethos, I wanted to look at the world ethos from a future perspective, not just from a current perspective. Because Klaus gave us some of the real human issues around climate change, refugee displacement, inequality, that are already fraying our global institutions and structures. But we have a tidal wave of change coming because of technology, where the world ethos is actually the raw material for dealing with it, and we're really not yet having that conversation. I have to start this presentation, however, by just giving one quick background detail. So I grew up in business as a strategist. I was trained in strategy. I was the CEO of a marketing company working with clients all over the world, like Procter & Gamble and Sony and Saab and Allianz here in Germany. I was going all over the world doing strategic planning sessions. And in 1987, when the book Our Common Future, the Brundtland Report, was published, that first introduced sustainability, no one in any of those highfalutin strategic planning sessions was talking about it. And I had a crisis of conscience at that time. And I began to read, and there were two things that blew my mind. One was reading Hans Kung's work on global ethics. And I came and talked to him exactly 20 years ago for a book I wrote, and he was gracious enough to give me an afternoon. I spent it with him in his home office, talking about his work and how to translate it into business. And the second big idea that blew my mind was Len Swidler's work in dialogue. I had not encountered it. And what I recognized was that with Kung, we had an architecture for solving our problems. With Professor Swidler, we had a methodology for solving our problems. So as we look at the future, we still have the benefit of these two things to bring to our particular problems. But when we look at the future as technology is fast unfolding, it's going to challenge us on many, many levels. So we already know this. So here, I'm sorry that this slide doesn't grow and build, but you have The Economist that was last week's, or the September 15th issue, that dealt with face recognition software that can actually tell if you have early symptoms of melanoma, huge, huge benefit, but can also tell if you have gay tendencies, what your gender preferences are, can be used and is already being used in crime prevention by making you guilty until proven innocent, based on what your face says. So we have that happening. On the other side, what you can't see is that there's a program going on in Toronto while this conference is on called The Future is Awesome, because it is. There's amazing, amazing potential there. But what we have in Yuval Noah Harari's book, Homo Deus, is an indication of how fundamental the transformation is, because it's going to challenge many of those principles of our core humanity that we've heard in these previous presentations, which are already fragile, and the technology is moving so quickly that the displacement of our human value is going to be potentially catastrophic. He talks about, again, we heard the statistic, that up to 40% of jobs are going to be displaced. Citibank did a survey and found that within 10 years, they published this 2 years ago, they projected that within 10 years, 30% of all banking sector jobs would be replaced by robotics and artificial intelligence. The CEO of Citibank last week said we were wrong. It's happening in 5 years. So the displacement is greater. Harari actually talks about a Hong Kong pharmaceutical company that has 5 board members. One of them is a machine that does the deep data analytics and scenario planning and strategic scenarios that work out on what's going to work, what's not going to work. 5 votes, and one of the votes already goes to a machine. So these are early days. So with the displacement we're seeing, so the worry is that it's our human value, because so much of it is derived from our work, so much of our belonging, our sense of community, comes from what we do. When that's taken away from us, a big part of that dignity that we've been talking about evaporates as well. I won't have a chance to get into all the amazing stories about what's possible and what's difficult by this technology, but it's not coming, it's here. There are already software programs that are determining your credit trustworthiness, your insurance trustworthiness. You will call a call center, call Siri, and you'll get an answer without ever talking to a human being about things. And so then there's a whole trust issue that begins to emerge of how do we trust when the human dynamic is not involved? And artificial intelligence experts, that's what they're working on today. So this is all the grow and build that didn't grow and build. But this is not a new issue. So the people who have been really worried about this, some of you will have heard Elon Musk's warning that artificial intelligence is the biggest threat to humanity, period, bigger than climate change. Stephen Hawking agrees. Bill Gates, somewhere in the middle, he says this is really a problem, but unless government changes its policies and business people change their thinking, it's going to be a pretty well of a lost cause. Earlier this year, the artificial intelligence experts, including Hawkins, including Elon Musk, got together and created principles, the 23 principles for guiding future artificial intelligence applications. Their first is we have to move from AI to BI. And the notion was that intelligence from a machine needs to be beneficial. Talk about definition. What does that exactly mean? They're basically saying that we have to give as much effort to the consequences of the technology as effort that we are putting into the innovation. And right now, it's 95.5 or even 99.1 in terms of everybody's into R&D and doing the technical innovation. They're aware that there are moral quandaries, but they don't know how to do that. Hence, the architecture that we bring is so important. The culture of trust. And they're talking about inter-expertise, that we need not only engineers, but also engineers who know how to talk to people who can bring a moral understanding. They make the point, but notice number 9, grow the moral responsibility of the designers. Why? Well, most of these high-tech engineers have such expertise and work in a silo completely unrelated to what the totality of the project is. We are dependent on the moral insights of a 25-year-old software genius who's never had the life experience to even ponder what some of these applications. Hence, we have the information, like Facebook is an example with what they've been going through, where it's a wonderful technology in terms of the social media possibilities, but all of the hatred, all of the potential nefarious influence like we saw in many of the elections that have occurred in the last year, unintended consequences. And his first response, Mark Zuckerberg's, was, well, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Why, he's really an adolescent. He's a techno expert. He, this last weekend, through Yom Kippur, doing moral reflection, said, I'm sorry, please forgive me that I've created something that is so divisive. That was never my intent. Bloomberg said, grow up, Facebook. It's tough being an adult. There's moral responsibility. That's what they don't know how to do. But look, it's only at 11 that the industry says, oh yeah, and we need to think about human values. Number 13 blew me away. To not unreasonably curtail human liberty. What? That shouldn't be number 1? To not, well, who defines reasonable? And what they're basically saying is, of course, there's going to be a trade-off between your privacy and your access to these services. So all of us who are on Facebook have signed 3,000-page legal agreements by saying, agree, right? And all of the things that happen in terms of emotional experimentation or how that data is sold about you, all of that we've agreed to. And the promise is they won't unreasonably curtail liberty. Of the 23 principles, number 23 was serving the common good with human values. Last year, again, the industry, Google, Facebook, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, Apple later joined, formed a consortium on creating the ethical values for artificial intelligence. A wonderful initiative that has a bit of conscience to it, a hugely problematic initiative in that First of all, these are competitors. How deep is their dialogue? How much collaboration do they actually know how to do? Number two, we are entrusting the ethical capacity of a technology that's going to impact every single human being on the planet to fierce competitors who, in each case, if we had the time, we could go through the major ethical transgressions committed by each of those companies. Google, yesterday, I was sitting at the Munich train station waiting for my train, doing an update. Yesterday announced that their division that's called DeepMind has hired 25 people to do deep ethics for DeepMind. So we can see how the industry is trying to catch up, but they're catching up with a technical capability that is far, far developed than the human and moral conscience for guiding it. So I think this is a huge opportunity. I think that artificial intelligence is actually the end of postmodernity, because the narrative that has fractured us, where suddenly there's a unifying narrative, which is to be a human being in a world where the technology and the virtuality is all around us, is what unites us. There's a unifying thing there, complicated to get to, but we share all of a sudden problems that will bring urgency where our divisions in the past prevented those urgencies from having discourse. So I think that we're actually, Francis Fukuyama, who's been cited before, wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Post-Human Future. I don't like post-human. I would like to prefer this as to be humanity flowering, more in the Teilhard de Chardin, that we are actually seeing a consciousness and a conscience shift. But that is, I think, the moment. We're in a moment that's now postmodernism, and we can start talking about the things that hold us together, and that's where the world ethos can help. The social, ecological, and technological complexities are shared. So we've had the language already, even there, about the common good. And I think our moment now is to think about the shared good. And this machinery, which has all sorts of benefits to it, if those benefits don't only accrue to a few elite, as is forecast in Harari's work, but actually is a benefit to us, we can begin to talk about the shared good and shared problem solving in a new way. And so the opportunity is that with all these diverse moral resources, none of us have the answers. So we are more interdependent on this global dialogue than ever before. So again, there's so much more that we could get into to talk about here. But what are the implications for business? Basically three. Business people are dying, they're asking, they're hungry for us to help them with the tools to grow their moral bandwidth. How do they even have a conversation about this? So we're seeing industry start, but every single board I work with is completely fixated on the opportunities of technology and completely unaware or unsettled by what the actual implications are. How do we give them a vocabulary and a practical skill set for investigating the issue with the diligence that it deserves? Secondly, there are a lot of things that occur. So one of the things that we know is that the technology industry is very misogynistic. That Google, even the most enlightened companies, you have very irregular participation by women, and women in those particular workforces often feel very threatened or marginalized. We also know that when you look at machine learning, if you look at some of the Google experiments that have been done of the way that searches come back, the searches carry racial bias and misogynistic bias that's built in both to software mistakes that the designers made, and also because it's a living algorithm. So if it's mostly being asked questions by misogynists, it's after a while beginning to feature those misogynist responses back. So we, as the conscience industry, need to be giving business real-time interventions on how do we deal with this new technology so that it is inclusive from a women's perspective? How do we deal with this new technology that deals with privacy issues as they continue to emerge? Real-time issues that need immediate real-time wisdom applied to it. And then finally, we can be thinking about how do we use this technology to actually develop a conscience capability that can almost be implanted into different scenarios and opportunities. So as usual with morality and with ethical wisdom, it helps to go backwards first. Where do we start? So, as a theologian, with my theological training, I wanted to introduce the idea of the Midrash. Many of you will already know this, but the Midrash is a rabbinic tool, ancient, but there are also Christian versions, there are versions in other traditions as well. The basic idea is that there is a central principle or text. See, I'm already out of time. I've got 3 more slides to go at least. So I just wanted to time myself so that, the idea being that there are major commentaries beside this core principle. So you're already seeing dialogue in action here. And the dialogue looks something like this. You can see how the core principle is there. Then, for example, if we were to have a Confucian input on the right-hand column and a Western Abrahamic interpretation on the right-hand column, then you would have a business ethics interpretation further out, and you would have resources added here that say, go to the Weltethos-Institut for this, and here's this particular. This is a simulation. This is actually a dialogue occurring on a textual page. So why don't we create an electronic midrash? Why don't we create a conscience mechanism where we basically do an ethical wiki? Use the technology that's there, connect scholars from around the world, connect practitioners from around the world, because they're asking some of the toughest questions and they have some of the most interesting innovations. And then use that to actually have a kind of ongoing discourse about problems. Traditionally, with new technology, we've adopted the technology, we've had it in market, we've then seen the problems, and we've come up with either a regulatory or an ethical response 5 to 7 years after it hits. We can't afford to do this now. How do we intervene and interact in a dialogue that actually begins to influence the people who are implementing this? It's coming, parts of it are already there, but we're just on the threshold of where the intelligence of this machinery is just about to go to another level. So we can argue about whether the machines will ever be capable of actual moral judgment, but it kind of doesn't matter. They're already doing immoral things. So how we begin to frame the moral interactions in calculus. Algorithms are based on calculation. So much of our ethical theory, Jeremy Bentham talked about doing the moral arithmetic for utilitarian theory. We don't want to go to only utilitarian, but all ethical theories involve some kind of imagination that has calculation attached to it. So an interfaith, interdisciplinary approach where we can then create some programs and actually insert them into these spheres where we then show the practical benefits of our philosophies and theologies. So in artificial intelligence, as some of you know, there's something called the Turing test. Turing was really the father of computers, one of the father of computers. Like most innovations, there are multiple sources. And his test is, we will know machine intelligence when we pose a question and the machine answers and a human person answers and the answers are indistinguishable. So coming here and being honored and so grateful to be here, I thought if we might be able to imagine for artificial intelligence the Kung key. And the formulation of that particular test is that artificial intelligence would be trustworthy when it meets the criteria of dignity from the perspective of diversity. And we can talk about what that may look like. We probably need an awful lot of help to get there. But why not have a moral framing that is as powerful as the computational framing going forward? Thank you.
Thank you to our 3 speakers. I believe there's going to be a panel set up. Chairs are coming up, hopefully.
Thank you.
Hannah is there. Now would be a great time to go to the bathroom. We've got about 3/4 of an hour until lunch, or to grab a cup of coffee if you feel you need one. I would... sorry? Herr Schleck, you can have the last word if you like at the end. we had three very different talks. The plan for the next little while is there'll be probably half and half. I'll ask a couple of questions that I've formulated as I've listened to the three speakers, and then you will have a chance in the last 20 minutes or so to ask your own questions. We've obviously covered a vast territory, so I will try to slow things down and focus on a couple of core elements in the next few minutes. Thank you.
And more water. Yes. Thank you, Klaus. Oh, thank you. I will. As a matter of fact, I wrote it up. I have an 8-page text. So, and please, I want your slides. I was going to ask for the same. So let me give you my card, and because again, the complementarity, and thank you. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Is this where you want us? Okay. I owe you this from last night. Thank you. Thank you. I have a text as well, so I can send you both the presentation and the written comments. Thank you. To do this too. Oh, sorry. I owe you this.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I did. Oh, I was out so cold. Had a hard time getting up. Thank you, Len, for this invitation. Thank you so much.
Exakt das ist. What you said was leadership number 5.
Yes.
Here we have industry 4. We are caring for industry 5.
Yes.
Which means the human being assisted by digitalizing
Yes.
to build up.
If you'd like to make your way back once you've filled your coffee cups and been to the bathroom, then we can plow on. Okay, well, I'll ask you all to come back and sit down a bit more firmly this time. Those of you at the back. Please do come and take a seat so we can carry on the discussion. You'll have plenty of time over lunch to carry on chatting.
Oh, very good. Some people are setting a good example by coming back. Michael Pearson is among them, Ben Philhauer. So people to count on. Thanks.
I will pose a few questions individually and then a couple of questions generally. My first question is for Professor Fan. We heard a lot about this Tuhao problem, this problem of wrong character or defective character among Chinese entrepreneurs. What do you think is the single most important factor for beginning to change that character?
I'm sorry, my English is not good enough, so I have to ask Dr. Chao, Dr. Zhang, help me to translate translator. So I speak Chinese and ask translator. 土豪是那个中国最近几年出现的一个新的词，这个词在中国重要到这样一个程度，也是复杂到这样一个程度，以致大家都可能知道，牛津这个英汉词典，那是专家们讨论了很长时间，没有办法把这个意思准确地翻译出来，到最后就采用了音译，中国人讲土豪，这个牛津英汉词典也讲土豪。
This is a new term, and because a lot of experts find it's very hard to explain how does it mean. So it's just like 土豪. So in Chinese it's 土豪. So it's just translate in English just like 土豪.
土豪，在中文当中，土豪分两个概念，一个是豪。豪是发财的意思，因为在中文当中，豪原来是猪，猪就是在中国文化当中象征着财富。
It has two meanings. First, it means rich, and how this word in Chinese it means pig, and pig sometimes it always means that rich.
但是这个土豪前面加一个土就完全不一样了。这个土表示说没有文化。缺乏教养，尤其是缺乏伦理的教养，这是一层意思。第二个，它从大众社会心态这个方面，也表示说，你发了财而不应该发财，发了财这个财发的不公正。
The first 土 means that maybe you are rich, but that rich man is not educated. He is not so cultured, and he is just making money. So it's some kind of not a good word for a rich person.
无论是哪一个意思，土豪这个概念都是指向企业的伦理和企业家的伦理。
It means entrepreneurs and enterprises ability.
因为它发生在中国40年前的那个改革开放，因为现在中国成功的企业家大部分是从那个改革开放初期以后成长起来的。
And today, most of the entrepreneurs start from the time of the China's opening up time, the reform time.
在40年之前，中国的企业基本上是政府官员在经营、在管理，他们当中的大部分人还是比较有一些政治的或者文化的教养。
40 years ago, most of the companies are governed by the government, and most of them are educated, cultured.
他们是企业家，但更重要的是政府官员。
Yeah, there may be some entrepreneurs, but most of them are actually government members.
40年前，中国改革开放开始实现市场经济，但是由于观念体制的原因，一开始进入市场经济的那一批企业家、生意人，大部分是没有经过很好的文化教养和也没有很好的社会地位和文化地位的。
At the beginning of most of the entrepreneurs, most of them, they are not very well educated, but they just start their business, their companies without very good educated.
他们有勇气，他们也很努力、很勤奋，为中国经济做出重大贡献，但是又给中国经济带来了先天性的曲线。
They had guts and they worked very hard, but in the other side, they made some bad influences for the Chinese economics.
所以，一个很重要的原因就是他们对于一旦发财以后，对于社会责任问题、企业的社会责任问题，以及企业这个社会财富的这个使用和管理问题。
As long as they become rich, they make money, and it is have some problem of their social responsibilities, consciousness.
So what's the one most important factor for changing or reforming this mentality, in your opinion?
最重要的那一点，最重要的那个最重要的那个因素是那个增多力。
最重要的因素是宗教和这个中国文化跟西方文化最大的不同。西方文化它是以这个顶层设计是伦理的顶层设计，企业的顶层设计是宗教，而中国呢，它是一种世俗伦理。
The most biggest factor may be the religions, because it's very different.
Yeah, actually, because in China and the Western cultures, we have a different top thing in the culture. Because in Western cultures, we rely more on the religious ideas about morality and ethics. But in China, we don't have this in general religious beliefs now. So when we came to this business issues, we actually don't have one special factor to make all people's consciousness about our ethics and morality. So which makes the two whole problems actually very special and difficult.
Thanks, Professor Zhang, for that comment. This is probably a good time for me to say that this is not the only Weltethos-Institut in the world. There's actually a second one at Peking University in China. Professor Fan is a vice director there, and this centre has a mandate officially sanctioned by the Chinese government to try to reintroduce, after the Cultural Revolution, Confucian categories, Confucian education, Confucian moral education, and with a specific mandate, thanks to the donorship of Carl Schlecht, for business, to try to reinvigorate this idea of the Confucian entrepreneur, the traditional Chinese entrepreneur. It's a fascinating discourse, which is every year there are conferences organized. So there's this open question of the future of China between this triangle of forces, Maoism, Western capitalism and institutions, and the Confucian tradition, and that's a conversation which is playing itself out, and it's fascinating to be an observer in that and be a part of it. Christopher, my next question's for you. We've had long discussions and fruitful disagreements. Christopher is a man with whom it's pleasant to disagree about the legacy of Hans Küng. The meaning of this, translated into English usually, is the Global Ethic Project, but the German, of course, is Weltethos, which is something more like world ethos or world spirit, or the spirit which is behind ethical decision-making, the kind of character development which goes into being able to be a dialogue partner and be open and truthful, and to embody the principles in the declaration, which was signed in 1993 and which Küng pioneered and drafted. Christopher, how can one bring to life Küng's declaration? We've seen repeated the 6 principles. I think we've all, Professor Leisinger said in his speech, we can all say that we embody these values very easily. It doesn't cost very much. But in everyday decision making, do we refer to them, or do we embody them or not? And can the declaration maybe serves as a reminder, but does it motivate leaders to be more ethical than they already are? Isn't Kung's declaration just teaching people what they already know?
Thank you very much for the question. It comes back, or let me start with what a pleasure it is to listen to our sister institutes in Beijing, and also, of course, with the Dialogue-Institut, which is a part of the global ethic discourse, of the Weltethos discourse. And to my knowledge, it's the first time that we're actually all on one stage discussing this. And I think we're finding common grounds and that's the first answer to your question. I think there are challenges that we need to meet, right? And the first challenge was laid out by Professor Leisinger with the sustainability question. Well, how do we create a sustainable world? And one of the answers is, well, we go to business and we reinstate ethics in business, and that's hard work. That's the work of going through all the different governance questions through different departments and spelling it out. And that's laborious, that's hard work, that's dirty work, that's work that relies on leadership. It also relies on good judgment, and it relies on engagement with the world. And I think that's one of the answers that we're giving, that everyone here is giving, that it's in dialogue that we really get a grip on reality, that we can change things, because dialogue is productive. It is an invitation with others to learn and to change together. So I think that's one answer how Kung's ideas come to life, is in meeting these challenges within the organization. Now we're also hearing a discourse that's very familiar to us, which is, there are economic actors driven by greed, driven by, the short-term profit. And I think that is one challenge for us here at the Global Ethics Institute as well, to draw on the religious traditions in order to promote a different understanding of ethics, to go beyond, as Klaus Dirksmeier would say, beyond the mechanistic paradigm that has dominated ethics for economics for the past 200 years, 150 years, which has actually exiled ethics, and now we're in the business of reintroducing it by going back and drawing on the traditions that we know. And I would encourage us not only to sort of insert certain healthy doses in a how do you say this, in a medical sense, to the understanding of business as a profit-driving machine, which it often is, and Professor Leisinger has pointed that out. I mean, a business case, making a business case is an important part. But I also encourage us to go beyond that and ask and demand more of business and help people to understand their transformation of what business is good for and what business is called for, what the purpose of business is. I think we also ought to have that conversation, not the least to prepare ourselves for the coming challenges ahead. And I'm glad you took the Global Ethic Project to the future. You relied on two notions that I also were strong in my presentation: the moral imagination that we need in order to meet the digital challenges, and the dialogue we need to have. I especially love the Midrash, of course, being a scholar of Jewish studies. So it's a hypertext in a sense, the first hypertext, right? So I think that's very, the digitalization will indeed question some of the assumptions that we hold dear with the Global Ethic Project, and also calls on us to find innovative ways to defend it. I think it is in meeting that challenge, coming back to meeting those challenges in the corporation on the ground, with tradition in an answer to greed and profit making, and in the challenge of digitalization, that we come back. We see that the entrepreneurial spirit and the moral imagination are related. If you have moral imagination, you can be a good entrepreneur. And I think there's a window and a chance for us here to to go the next step with this conference, to answer questions in the future, but also to broaden our debate across cultures. And I'm glad for the window into the respective discourses that we have here. I think it proves to me that the ideas of the Weltethos project are fruitful. They need application and they need dialogue. So that's why my time is over now.
If I could just add to that, because when I introduced this notion of the end of postmodern, we in business have taken the postmodern notion of morality being either a subjective or a relative, and therefore something that is outside of business. Business people have these questions, and they do have these moral things that speak to their own truth, but they believe it's a personal. What, to me, the global ethos, because I like that better than an ethic, it's not a rule, but an attitude, an imagination, a commitment, that allows us to have a different conversation. And I can see it with executives, where they're saying, I had this, but I didn't know I could talk about it publicly. This is giving us that permission for a dialogue to break some of the tyrannies of postmodernism.
My next question is a kind of follow-up for all three of you, I guess. Thomas Nagel said that the difference between scientific progress and moral or political progress was that scientific progress was relatively easy because it only took a few geniuses to get together, or sometimes one genius on her own, to make breakthroughs that the rest of us can benefit from. The kinds of things we're talking about, political change, moral change, social change, require shaping or changing the hearts and minds of millions of people, or of everybody, before there's any kind of progress. And it seems that responsible leadership, every one of us in our daily lives comes into positions of leadership, so it's something that affects all of us. You said, John, in your presentation that Kung for you provided a kind of architecture with this, the 2+4 principles, which are well known from the Declaration, and Len Swidler came along with his dialogue decalogue. You can Google that if you like. It's a catchy, it's a list of principles for how one can engage in honest, open, mutually beneficial dialogue. My question, I guess, for all three of you is, business people are short on time and they like things that are well packaged. And Kung, with the Declaration, it was quite a nice package. It's about a 15-page document, the Declaration Towards a Global Ethic, but you can shorten it to these 6 principles if you want. However, I was having a joke with Professor Zuchanek over dinner last night, and he pointed out that, of course, if you reduce things to lists of very short principles, people say, well, yeah, I already knew that. I already knew that was important. So how do you negotiate the deep need for humanistic education and the reform of character? All over the world, it's the same dynamic. Something which will take years of and hours of dialogue and talking to someone so that their character can develop. How can you negotiate that problem when you're faced with the day-to-day realities of running a business where time matters and where you can't invest large amounts of time and money in the moral education of your staff or your customers?
Well, coming out of the financial crisis, there's actually a conversation that's been happening globally by business schools, by practitioners, by consultants on how to get to responsible capitalism, how to get to what at Unilever Paul Polman has been calling purpose-driven capitalism. Others are calling moral capitalism. You can see the attempt to change the imaginary, to change the common sense rules that we've been using that we now know don't work, but we're in that in-between of finding the new rules. So I think there's a couple of things. One, a theologian, a Canadian theologian, Bernard Lonergan, has a method for learning that involves you study the facts, you get to understanding, you translate that ultimately into questions of responsibility. And he says, but sometimes that doesn't work because our common sense is biased. Our very worldview has biases that prevent that system of learning responsibility from working. And his solution, again, right back to the presentation of Cosmopolitan, his solution in the 1970s was what he called Cosmopolis, where we needed to learn how to dialogue and stand in the shoes of perspective radically different from our own in order to be able to see a different sensibility and then through the dialogue bring that to life. So in specific terms, business people are operating because of market pressures, as Howard and I were talking this morning, but those market pressures are changing. Those market forces are changing. By some estimates, 1/3 of investment dollars now have social criteria, environmental criteria. That's a radical, radical kind of change. But to continue that change in the imaginary, we have a very, very clearly defined, I think, way of doing homo economicus. Transactional, price, efficiency-driven. There are very, very linear kinds of qualities to that. And I think what an ethos that comes out of our shared humanity asks us to add to that imagination, because there's a lot of productivity that comes from homo economicus, a homo vulnerabilis. An understanding of our humanity, where vulnerability is, first of all, our ability to be hurt, to be damaged, to be harmed, but also our vulnerability is the source of our creativity, the source of our entrepreneurship. We're usually trying to solve a need, solve a new problem. So I think part of it is that we have to change our very notion of the anthropology of markets to be able to deal with the issues that are impressing themselves right now on us.
I'm not so sure I would give such a comprehensive answer. I'm not so sure either whether we really need a new kinds of ethics or, wait for the reformed corporation or reformed human beings. Rather, I would say that let's just start the practice of dialogue. And if we have dialogical leadership and we have dialogical relations with the world, then we are turning ourselves into learning human beings, into learning communities, into learning corporations. Raban Fuhrman is here. He's proposing a learning democracy. We might hear about this more later in the discussions. I think that's the main point. We dialogue our way into the problem, and by way of learning, I trust that we can. We're reaffirming old values. I think Küng's basic message is also we do not need to reinvent the world. We can appreciate what we already have and go from there, which is a difference to what we'll hear tomorrow to Professor Höfe, who will come up with more progressive principles for designing a world republic yet to come. It's a progressive project. I think in that sense, the World Ethos project by Hans Küng is a curious case of conservative progressivism, right? It's about detecting and reaffirming conservative values of dialogue that end up in dialogue, that culminate in a dialogue, and rediscovering dialogue as a driver of productivity, a driver of change, a driver of progress, basically. And so I'm not that worried. I just wish and hope that everyone would start, practice a dialogical disposition, cultivate it in herself and in the community.
I'll ask my last question to Professor Fan. I'll ask you the question now as a follow-up to what Christopher has just said about dialogical dispositions. Most corporations are structured as hierarchies where there are all kinds of incentives not to be particularly dialogical. And Professor Fan's presentation had this beautiful phrase, how was it, gentle contempt, or that Chinese business leaders often suffer because they don't receive feedback or constructive, serious criticism from below, and that contributes to, and obviously we don't have to go to China to hear about examples like the Volkswagen scandal, of a culture of people who are maybe afraid to engage in dialogue with people who are, maybe they're afraid with people on their own level, but there's always, within any organization, there can be fear about speaking one's mind because of the consequences. So my question for Professor Fan is, how, in a Chinese context, what role can education play in changing or shaping a corporate culture which is more open to dialogue?
他的问题就是说，在中国的文化环境里面，我们有什么样的方式能够为这些商人提供一些教育，让他们能够在全社会不同社会阶层之间的对话变得更加开放？
我以为刚才讨论的那个，就是说通过政治家，通过一些我们知识分子，对于 企业家的启蒙，就让他们学会一些伦理的原则，按照伦理原则去行动，当然是一种很好的理念。但是我觉得这种理念很难贯彻。
And the Professor Fan thought that maybe the ethic principle is very important, but actually it is very hard to make it active, to act in the real.
Yeah, sorry. Professor Fan thought because in China we have a lot of discussion about the moral and ethical principles in different disciplines, and political comments sometimes about the ethical principles cannot be put into practice in business area. So we have lost that kind of dialogue between different disciplines.
无论是政治家还是专家学者，对企业家的伦理启蒙、伦理教育，都只能建立在偶然的基础之上。这一条道路对建立我们现在的企业伦理，不可能达到一个最好的效果。
We have a lot of expectation from political area and also scholars in universities, but we haven't established a long-term mechanism about this dialogue, about how to enlighten entrepreneurs. So we need to work more on that.
真正解决这个问题，需要一种文化，特别是需要一种文化的信念。比如说在 这个西方文化当中，我刚才说了，它有宗教，这个宗教它保持了一种终极关怀和财富之间必要的紧张。用基督教的话讲，就是富人要进天堂，比骆驼穿进针眼还要难。
The problem in China now, we don't have a strong idea about this this culture belief in entrepreneurs, or in other words, we don't have that cultural confidence. It's not like in Western tradition, we have that kind of religious beliefs that rich people, it's difficult for them to get into heaven. But in China, because of the years of the reform and the transition, we have lost that kind of belief, which makes the entrepreneurs in China, they have lost their belief, which makes the ethical education becomes even more difficult in China.
所以我的观点是，我们要讨论这个问题，要真正解决这个问题，必须要回到一个完整的文化系统当中，尤其是回到一个文化的顶层设计当中。比如说，在中国过去有所谓的叫孔夫子的为富不仁，太富有了，那么他就可能是不道德。那么这样一个问题，就是说要建立在财富和伦理这个之间的一种乐观的和又是紧张的那样一种关系。
So my argument is that we need to re-establish our understanding and belief somehow about the Chinese traditions, because as Confucius said, in traditional China, those people who are too rich cannot become a kind or people who care about humankind and human being. So we need to go to the top design in Chinese culture and entrepreneur ethics to work more on that.
所以我们必须要回到文化，回到这个文化对话，回到文明对话，也就是说我们建立的这样一种人文管理和 management， 然后再来真正解决这样一个问题，这是人文管理的意义所在。
So I hope that we can establish a dialogue, not even within the culture, specific culture context, but also between or among different cultures, so we can have better understanding about humanistic management. So after that, we can work more in practice about how to establish the ethical problems within the Chinese entrepreneurs.
所以我要给大家一个劝告，就是说，在西方如果不懂伦理的话，也是企业家不能尽社会责任，企业不能很好的发展。但是如果说在中国不理解中国伦理、不了解中国伦理的话，可能就是外部的企业家也好，外部的学者也好，将完全难以进入中国。
So I have an advice that in China, if you don't have complete understanding about Chinese culture and about Chinese tradition, for those entrepreneurs from other countries or other cultures, it's probably very difficult for them to get into the core of Chinese economy and Chinese society. Thank you.
We've got about 10 minutes left until the official finishing time. I've got hands in the air already with questions. That's the idea. We probably go a little bit over time, but I intend not to keep you too long between you and your lunch break. So, Professor Leisinger, I saw the first hand.
And Howard.
Thank you very much for the very interesting contributions. You said at the very last slide that the Weltethos is a human disposition, more or less. I would call it an attitude. Andreas would call it an understanding of the game. It has very much to do with a very individual view of the world, what is important, and now secondly, and this is why I raised the word, and within what time frame. You know, if you said, John, that more and more companies are investing in triple bottom line investment funds, or you know, why? Why are insurance companies doing that? Because they are not interested in big profit ups and downs, but in a permanent, reliable development. Why are, you know, every idiot can look good in the short term. And it's so difficult to remain in a frame, in a corridor of appropriate behavior. And you know, the time framing, if you talk to parents, of course they care about the fate of their children. I'm now a grandfather. Of course, it's important to me what happens to my grandchildren. But then the grandchildren of my grandchildren are not on my radar. The attitude would be the golden rule in an intertemporal attitude, you know, do not do upon others what you do not want to be done on your own grandkids and their kids. So it's an attitude, and it has to do with the time frame of whom do you want to kind of please.
Thank you. May I get the microphone? I'm sorry. My question to you. You have a wonderful tradition and culture, which we call Confucian. And you have entrepreneurs. And Chinese entrepreneurs learn very quick as the general Chinese. In total, that's my experience, much faster as the Germans. So what you developed in the last 30 years is a proof that they learn a lot. And you should remember that what Küng said is based on Chinese wisdom. It's the golden rule, and all what he brought and found out in the various religions was again the same. So each religion founder had the same message to its people for their well-being. And this is well understood in China. What you explained, what happens there with rich people and so was the same story here, same in the United States. But out of richdom, you also develop step by certain people a richdom in mind and in heart. When everything is fulfilled in life, what do you like to enjoy? Enjoy a skyscraper or a yacht or any sort of well-being. And all of a sudden you find out that you enjoy much more in developing your people and your company and how they do it. And I think you have in China a wonderful tradition. And there is no difference to our tradition as Küng found out. And everybody spoke about trust yesterday, when you had the chance. In short, we have a very simple tool which everybody understands, not academic. This is the 5 or the 4 question probe. And I would like that everybody put it on his iPhone to have it every day. This is a simple tool to create trust. Everybody speaks about trust. How can we create it with integrity? By following basically the basic values which are the same worldwide. That's the discovery of the Weltethos idea of Küng. And the only thing what is missing there is love. But this is also developed and coming out of doing good business with good people. You don't sell a machine without trust because the customer doesn't take it. He looks for trust in the performance, in the machine, in the people who do it with trusting themselves. So the human values in a business are the most productive element, much more as machines. And this discovery takes time. China has a lot of time. You lost a lot of time, hundreds of years. You know why. But now they understand they are free to develop their ideas. Therefore, we are very happy to say that after we founded 5 years ago the Weltethos-Institut in Peking, that we found out that we are so close together. And there's a very positive feeling for me in investing in this Weltethos idea. And just to last word, 20 years ago, I joined Mr. King only for building trust, because I found out that the trust-building Weltethos idea, which is golden rule, etc., is so helpful in adding up to our company values, which are developed in the team, in the company, that we believe the same in this and that. We have it in yellow here at the wall. And to develop this in a global business, global values don't exist. Ethical values exist. And they are all the same because they are humane and have been developed years ago by people for a better life. And a better life in business today is, of course, different from 2,000 years ago. But the humans are still the same. And we only have to recollect what they did and build up. And I have no problem at all with digitalization and so and so. With people, you can use this tool of digitalization to develop not Industry 4.0, but 4.5. So it will be a huge development and acceleration for everything what we created in the last years. And doing it jointly together with China is a huge chance, which we also develop in our China Center here, for developing trust. The mission of the Institute is Vertrauen stiften. That's a little more is giving this. But building trust between China and Germany is a very important point because we are so close and can add up to both sides. So I'm very happy that you found the ground which is the same, which we follow here in the Weltethos-Institut, which was founded here at university based on our merge of Putzmeister values with a Chinese company. And they only decided to make this merger based on trust, because the top people of Sani have the same values as we have. But it's so difficult to realize that in life. And that's a continuous task which we have in good leadership. And this is part of our program of developing these ideas. So we are very close together. The language is so different, therefore it's difficult to understand. But a little bit what we understand also to our closer cooperation is that we are very happy to develop friendship and understanding between China and Germany. And China will be, due to the faster learning, to the wonderful tradition which they have, the world power #1 in future. When you look at the catastrophic things which happen with our sort of democracy in the United States, sometimes also in Germany, we can learn a lot to improve also this social system. Sorry being so long, but that was my message. And I have another point.
Is it a question? Because we need to get into dialogue.
Yeah, when I founded this institute, where we invest 1 million per year, I put 7 guidelines. I think they are here. And the golden rule is there, the 4-question probe is there. From the original, and we have to go back to those very simple, basic human elements, which are the basis. It's the same as when you put in an engine oil. The engine doesn't run without oil or with catalysts which you have, but you need it, and then only it performs. So our message here is the oil in the human mechanism. So thank you very much. Sorry for being a little long.
Actually, I do have a very quick answer to both of those points, to the question and to this commentary. In Paul Pullman's recent article on the trust-making corporation, he says that the basic quandary that has eroded business trust are externalities, that our profitability does not take into account the full social costs, environmental costs. And as those things get put off, business succeeds while society suffers or the environment suffers. So even only pricing externalities changes time frame and begins to have that generational forward-looking. So I just thought it was interesting. He had one word as the answer to the trust crisis that was also the answer to the sustainability crisis.
It's just after 12, but I can see 2 or 3 hands in the air.
Yeah, let's take all the questions together and then a final round. Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted, well, actually, I'd like to say something about each one, but I can't, obviously. So let me just pick the last one. John, you pointed us to the go. In a certain sense, everybody in this room knows about the past. I mean, the work that Hans and others have done have laid it all out for us. The future, nobody knows. Some of us have some guesses, or a little bit more than guesses. But the future is happening, and it's going to happen even more, not just arithmetically, but exponentially. We better get on it yesterday. Otherwise, we're dead. And I mean, we humans, we will kill ourselves. And so, the person to read, and I heard it behind you all the time, John, is Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard doesn't just talk about the future, but oh my God, he talks about a future in a way that is absolutely ecstatic. I want to be there. I mean, if people need to read Teilhard, or maybe a distillation of him, John, maybe you and some others should get together and provide a distilled businessman, I mean M-A-N, man, because the women already know it for the most part. Us men, we're dead. And can you do something about that? Can you give us or help to give us Teilhard as an inspiration for the future, because we better do it quickly.
Klaus last night gave us the story of 1932, that your birth and these values being born in another culture at the same time. There's an equivalent with Teilhard, because when you read Suri Rabindo, his work from an Eastern mindfulness perspective is exactly parallel to what Teilhard has done. So again, we have this synchronicity of people looking at the current reality and imagining the future. Walter Brueggemann, the theologian, says prophets do not know the future. They're not in the prognostication business. When you look at what prophets do, they read the current reality with such honesty that they see how the future will unfold in its awesome possibilities and in its awful consequences. So that's, I think, where we are. We have the chance of being prophetic now.
As a former practical business person, I find all of this A, fascinating, and B, rather relevant. The problem is, as John just demonstrated, that very few executives are going to read these books and have these thoughts. You mentioned about artificial intelligence, and the machine was now on the board, 1 of 5, I think you said. If you look at how board members and executives often perceive their roles to be, they are already acting as automatons of the future. And they are not bringing the soft side, as I would have to define it, to the arguments that they need to decide in running their firms. And the second thing, and I know it's incredibly hard because you can ask yourself, how do you measure love or something else? And that is, you mentioned profits, John. People arithmetically measure these matters and project them into the future. And one of the great difficulties of dealing with the business world is they live and die by measurement of current matters and project them to the future. So until we can deal with the measurement mania of the marketplaces, I think we have a very difficult role in building the bridges over these chasms.
But these tools are there. So Puma, German company, for the last 5 years has actually been introducing ecological balance sheets and social balance sheets. The early days of creating what we have in finance through general accounting principles. So the math problem is definitely being addressed from a trust perspective and from a social impact perspective. We just need to bring that consciousness and that understanding.
Okay, I am Fabrizio Maimone from Lund University. I have a question for Professor Fa. My question is, maybe there could be also a cross-cultural issue in the trying to develop Weltethos in China. I mean, humanism was born in Europe when individuals decided that the man was at the center of the universe. There is a strong focus on individualism in the Reformation, also in Italy, in the Renaissance and so on. Meanwhile, for what I know, Confucianism is focused on harmony, on society, on collectiveness. So maybe there is some kind of problem related to a shift between a cultural system to another one. That obviously it does not mean that we are completely different. Humans are humans everywhere, but on the other side, maybe there is also a cross-cultural issue. Thank you.
Do we have more questions? Are we? Sure. Maybe I'll take the time to quickly answer to the attitude. I think it's a matter of translation. So we would probably agree it's about Haltung in German, and disposition I like for its relevance for the competence discourse, because I think having an ethos is also a sort of perspective that I'm having and a sort of can-do disposition, right? So I can act a certain way because I have this disposition, attitude, Haltung. So I think we're close and it's a question of translating it. One more comment about the oil in the business. I think there's an argument to be made, not now, not here, but to be read in publications of our institute, that we need to go beyond the mechanistic paradigm of business and go on to a humanistic paradigm. And the mechanistic paradigm is one where we know certain mechanics, we know certain screws that we can drive, and really we become automatons of a larger logic of maximizing profits, and freedom and responsibility are sort of exiled from business. I think if we want to reintroduce freedom and responsibility and exile into economics again, we would do better with what you have proposed and you with a pragmatist view of business and with dialogue as a driver of learning and change.
Professor Fa.
我想回应一下希利德先生和这位先生讨论的问题。第一个呢，我认为希利德先生讲的非常正确，是说现在我们这个人文管理所要做的一个最重要的工作是实现这个企业家和文化、财富和文化、财富和伦理之间重新走到一起，建立一种新的文明。
I appreciate your question. So my basic understanding about your question, my basic answer to your question is, I think now we need to find out approach to come together, not just from entrepreneurs, from other parts, but also from governments, from scholars, or from researchers from different cultural backgrounds. So we need to have a chance to come together to think about this problem together.
人文管理的核心问题是企业和文化财富和文化的重新联姻，而在这一方面呢，中国和世界、中国和德国都有共同的特点，这之间出现了一个巨大的断裂，就是传统和现代之间的断裂。在西方是在尼采之后出现了一个断裂，在中国是在五四运动打倒孔家店之后出现了一个断裂。所以说，后来的这个韦伯提出新教伦理的概念，和我们现在提出个鲁商的概念，实际上就是文化和伦理重新走到一块，伦理和企业、文化和财富重新走到一块的一种努力。
We take humanistic management as an example. What we try to do from his understanding is we want to put the wealth and culture together. That's what the purpose of humanistic management. But what we have is we got a gap in between, not between that two things, but between a tradition and modernity. So like in Western cultures, that gap happens from a famous philosopher, Nietzsche, yes. Thank you. But in China, that gap happens in the 1950s and 60s when Chinese government started to have this cultural revolution. So that gap between the tradition and modernity makes that problem feels like it's a economic or business problem. Actually, that's the issue between the wealth and ethics. So a press defense ideas is what we want to do with the humanistic management is how we rethink about the togetherness between the wealth and culture.
在所有的文化当中，或者所有的企业的这个对话当中，实际上我认为中国和德国、中国文化和德国文化、中国企业和德国企业的可对话性是最强的。
Within all the, as we just mentioned, we actually have a lot of commonality between several different cultures, like between Germany and between China. We actually share a lot of common in our traditions. So that traditions can make things work out. So when we now think about this humanistic management issues, we can probably try to re-drag out these values or elements from both of the cultures to think about it.
中国文化受德国文化，在世界所有的其他文化当中，中国文化受德国文化的影响最大。从马克思到这个到黑格尔，到康德，到现在的马克思韦伯，德国文化在所有的其他的依制文化当中，对中国文化影响最大。
I believe that in current Chinese culture, we have got great influence from German scholars. For example, we take a lot of ideas from Karl Marx, and we also have a lot of influence from Max Weber, from Kant, from Hegel. All these ideas make actually Chinese modern cultures got a lot of influence from Germany.
但是德国企业进入中国企业的比重，并没有像它文化那么大。我觉得，这是可能是德国企业家，包括德国现在的这个文化对中国文化的一种理解上出现了一种差异。
But I noticed that compared to such great influence from culture, like German companies haven't got that great influence on Chinese entrepreneurs or Chinese economic developments. That can be an issue that was us to think about why that happened, or that because the German entrepreneurs haven't got great enough understanding about Chinese culture or the current circumstances or other problems.
所以我觉得那个未来德国企业家进入中国，中国和德国企业家之间的交流、文化交流的空间是非常大的。但是这个交流就是这位先生刚才所说的，实际上我们应该发展出一种寻找、发现异质文化之间相同的那个能力，而不是说仅仅是看它是不是有什么差异来进行对话。对话是相同，而不是求差异。
Therefore, I think there is a great space or great room for us to work together. I mean, for the German entrepreneurs and Chinese entrepreneurs to work together in the future. And I personally believe that when we think about the cross-cultural studies or we think about these ethical values, we probably need to think more about our commonalities rather than always looking at those differences.
比如说，我们创造财富，挣了更多的钱，都是为了获得永恒。那么，在西方宗教文化当中，它就是要得到上帝的拯救；那么，在中国文化当中，它就要通过家族的传承。所以说，中国的财富，企业家创造的财富都是传给儿子，这当然影响他的企业的技术发展，但是这是中国文化当中的最重要的一个部分。
So, for example, we making fortune. We keep the capital growth. The main purpose for that to keep us the eternity. But in the Western culture, that eternity goes to God, to the religion beliefs, a religious belief. But in China, that eternity always goes to family. So we keep the blood goes to make that eternity happens to everyone. So that can be a small difference. But if we look beyond that, we can see that's a kind of community.
对，西方文化的当中，人的永恒是在上帝拯救当中实现；中国文化的永恒是在家族血脉当中的生生不息来达到。所以，在这个意义上，大家都追求永恒，但是我们的方法是不一样的，只是方法不同而已。
So sometimes we can see that we have the same pursuit, but the only difference is we have different approaches. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at the same pursuit in the future, or are we looking at the different approaches?
所以人文管理不需要的是培养出一种、发展出一种文化对话的、寻找文化共同性的那样一种能力。
So I think the humanistic management, the main purpose of that is to try to develop the abilities to having that dialogue, not just within different areas, but also between different cultures.
I'm going to resist the very strong temptation to make a comment of my own now, and I'm going to ask those of you who still have questions to follow the lead and understand that we're already 20 minutes over time, and we're back here at 1 o'clock for the next session. Oh, you want the last word?
Yes.
As usual. Yeah.
No, I'm stepping out of my role as a panelist and back into my role as a facilitator, I would say. Now, this has been a very dense morning for all of us. It's been a lot of input. It is the densest part already behind you. From now on, I promise, will be more dialogical, not only because we will continue with a workshop after the break, but also because the break now is an opportunity to engage in dialogue and conversation. I also promise that it's the last panel composed solely of males. We'll be better with that as we progress. And I think we should take an hour's time until 1:15, just in order to get to know each other, relax a little bit, let it sink in. We do have enough time in the afternoon for all that we're trying to accomplish there. So we would meet 1:15. And I would thank you, Jonathan, for the facilitation of the panels. Of course, all the panelists, including myself. And thank you for the patience. And we'll get to talk now in the break, and then afterwards in a workshop, which I will announce and set up 1:15. Thank you very much, and enjoy.
Can you hear it louder now? Trying hard to knock us down. Noise is getting louder now, but nothing gonna take us out. We in this altered state, it's all blurry. Don't matter when we gonna wait, I ain't worried. Stay with me in this altered state, we all blurry. And I don't wanna wait, I don't wanna wait. Just stop. Aren't you tired of always waiting for the drop? 'Cause there's more to life than all the things you got. Hold you hostage 'cause you think you need a lot. You got one shot to start fresh. Working on the part that's not just blood and flesh. Find the quiet place where you can start to bless. Maybe all these thoughts are from imagination. And don't stress, we'll find this altered state, it's all blurry. Don't matter when we gonna wait, I ain't worried. Stay with me in this altered state, we all blurry. And I don't wanna wait, I don't wanna wait. This altered state, don't matter when we gonna wait. Stay with me in this altered state. You don't doubt, it's not too late. Are you feeling me when I say you're tempting fate? Double back, check your facts and get it straight. I promise you it will be worth the wait. This altered state, can you hear it louder now? Trying hard to knock us down. Noise is getting louder now, but nothing gonna take us out. We in this altered state, it's all blurry. Don't matter when we gonna wait, I ain't worried. Stay with me in this altered state, we all blurry. And I don't wanna wait, I don't wanna wait. Just stop. Aren't you tired of always waiting for the drop? 'Cause there's more to life than all the things you got. Hold you hostage 'cause you think you need a lot. You got one shot to start fresh. Working on the part that's not just blood and flesh. Find the quiet place where you can start to bless. Maybe all these thoughts are from imagination. And don't stress,